Majority Report with Sam Cedar.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Cedar.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Cedar.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It's Thursday, February 27th, 2020. I'm Michael Brooks. This is a Michael Thursday. This is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We're broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On today's program, Alex Sammon. He's a writer for the American Prospect. We're talking about his new piece, Barack Obama's Legacy is Narendra Modi. As Trump visits India and pogroms continue against Muslims and the Modi government continues its war on India's Islamic population, we talk about the relationship between Obama and Modi. Is it a micro case study for neoliberalism facilitating global authoritarianism? In Brazil, outrage as Jair Bolsonaro appears to endorse protests calling for a military coup. President Lula saying Brazilians must act against this authoritarian move. Surprise of all surprise. Remember that coup that some folks had a really hard time calling a coup in Bolivia? Happened several months ago. Some people thought it was a green uprising. Well,
Yashkamak
Yashkamak
hasn't tweeted about Bolivia since November.
He has not tweeted about Bolivia since November. A lot of people have been keeping their mouths shut. Well, it looks like a new statistical analysis reported in the Washington Post completely undermines the U.S.-backed OAS's accusations of voter irregularities. And apparently, shock of all shocks, Evo Morales won the election before that coup.
By the way, observing the statistical patterns, the left was in the moment.
The left was in the moment that you could have heard if you were reading Mark Reisbach or Guillermo Long or anybody that wasn't totally cynical and had a slight idea of what they were talking about. ODC confirms the first possible community transmission of the coronavirus in California. Mike Pence, the man put in charge of handling this virus by the Trump administration, had a homophobic policy in Indiana that sparked an HIV outbreak. What a surprise there. Did Donald Trump just fire his pandemic response team? And apparently there are a lot of authoritarian moron superdelegates in the Democratic Party because they're telling the New York Times they are prepared to throw out the results of a democratic process to stop Bernie Sanders with electoral powerhouses like Chris Coons, even as other candidates in the race continue to make noises about not endorsing the Democratic outcome of the Democratic primary. Elizabeth Warren reverses herself, now using anti-single-payer talking points from the right. And new polls show Bernie Sanders with leads in Virginia and Colorado. All that and much, much more on today's Majority Report. Folks,
Just had a vision of footage of the Trump administration responding to coronavirus, but done in a style of The Apprentice. And it made me feel very scared for the world.
Omarosa comes back. She's like, all right, the president is coming. We've got a plan. Everybody be cool, calm, and collected. President Trump is coming.
You said you're going to have a vaccine, but this is a hard-boiled egg.
Yeah.
Stephen Baldwin apologizing.
Just like, your task was create a vaccine and build concentration camps for all people of color. And instead, you've given me a jamba juice that doesn't even taste like juice. sorry, Mr. Trump, I think what happened was Meatloaf didn't do his assignment. We all know that Meatloaf is totally incompetent. I've said it many times, but Steven, a CEO, that was the best part of the Apprentice, was that he always would say that the group lead takes responsibility. That is actually maybe the funniest thing that Donald Trump has ever said. Sorry to say it, we all know that Meatloaf is terrible, but when you're in charge, you take responsibility.
Buck stops there.
The buck stops at the top. What sound are we starting with? Number one? Okay. So the coronavirus is obviously starting to sort of pick up notice. This is something, every time we have a kind of global outbreak like this, we need to think back to the global gutting of public health, which started with the Reagan administration in the 80s, but it's accelerated. World Bank and IMF austerity programs to this day force developing countries to cut and not invest in medicine. International pharmaceutical cartels don't invest in responsiveness to diseases that emerge in the global economic periphery. And in the United States, of course, decades of austerity have left people vulnerable. This really is another very obvious and great argument for having single-payer Medicare for all as a basic act of protecting global and national public health. Here is a hearing from yesterday with Congresswoman Jane Schakowsky from Illinois. This is on the House Budget Committee. And she is going to be grilling Alex Azar, who is of the HHS. And there had been, yeah, go ahead.
Health and Human Services.
Health and Human Services. And with regards to some comments that had been made, and she'll explain in the clip, about whether or not a corona vaccine would be affordable.
Reaffirm, then you're saying it will for sure be affordable for anyone who needs it.
I'm saying we would want to ensure that we work to make it affordable, but we can't control that price because we need the private sector to invest. The priority is to get vaccines and therapeutics. Price controls won't get us there.
Mr. Secretary.
So that is extraordinary. Take that in. This is the head of the government Health and Human Services. We talked yesterday about why having state funding and state industry that provide the most basic services, and in this case, where that certainly was not like, this is John Kenneth Galbraith, who was a great progressive intellectual. He was not a socialist, okay? This is very basic stuff that anywhere out of extreme danger to everybody on the planet, capitalism, we would all agree on. And you have this is not the CEO of a pharmaceutical company trying to undermine important public policy through donations and propaganda, but an agent of that propaganda as head of Health and Human Services under Donald Trump. This is a tweet from David Griscom, producer on the Michael Brooks Show, that is actually really important. So he's quote tweeting Michael McAuliffe, who quoted that exchange. Azar, who's Health and Human Services, refuses to promise a coronavirus vaccine will be affordable for anyone. We would want to ensure that we work to make it affordable, but we can't control that price because we need the private sector to invest. Price controls won't get us there. And David Griscom wrote, one day we will regard the cruel cost-benefit analysis of capitalism that results in so many deaths as part of the massive death tolls of this barbaric human-created system. And that's exactly right. When we create the black book of capitalism, the millions and millions of preventable deaths from AIDS, from pneumonia, from malaria, not to mention just basic deprivation of health care that leads to tens of thousands of people that die every year in the United States, is going to be on the books. And of course, we all know empirically that the production of low-cost and generic drugs and state-funded drugs and price controls have been the only way that we've ever controlled disease outbreaks.
I mean, like, we all expect a lot worse, I mean, frankly, than the coronavirus in the next 50 years, worldwide, pressures on supply chains.
Yep.
And the very first test where he's talking about some people aren't just going to be able to afford this vaccine. We're going to work to ensure that we try to get there, but some people are going to be left out.
And as soon as you have a conversation, it's very easy to say like, hey, well, look, some healthcare is like a luxury, man. This is why you can't have that conversation. This is why actually we do need some Aaron Bastani discourse. The most luxurious healthcare imaginable should be publicly provided for, deliverable 24/7 and free for every single human being. It's both morally obvious and a absolute strategic necessity in an age of, well, I mean, these diseases are only going to climate change and ag policy. They're coming. I mean, something that's been way less melodramatic, but the proliferation of Lyme disease across the Northeast, that was not a thing. In the same way, a couple decades ago, it existed. But the warmth of the climate has proliferated this thing that actually is very dangerous if you don't treat it. All right, folks. Brendan.
I was just going to remind everyone that Alex Azar was previously the president of Eli Lilly, a pharmaceutical manufacturer, and has contributed over $100,000 to their political action committees over the years.
So he actually wasn't part of like a public health group. He wasn't involved. He wasn't, an infectious disease specialist.
Nah, he was a C-suite guy.
Wow.
Into the opportunities about infectious diseases.
And actually, there aren't that many, which is another dynamic we're going to be dealing with. All right, folks, we're going to take a brief break. We'll be right back with Alex Sammon on the Majority Report. Welcome back to the Majority Report. Joining us now is Alex Sammon. He's a staff writer for the American Prospect. His new piece, Barack Obama's Legacy is Narendra Modi, was just released in January. We're going to get to the piece in a minute, but Alex, Donald Trump was just in India. There have been a variety of very aggressive moves, some of which we've covered on the show, including the canceling of these Indian constitution and intensification of violence and occupation in Kashmir, citizenship bills, killing people in street protests, as well as actually more broad sort of culturally sanctioned acts of violence targeted at the Muslim community. Can you explain to us what's happening now in India from the Modi government towards India's Muslim population?
Absolutely. So there's been a kind of spasm of violence towards the Muslim population in India, which is a very significant minority there. It's hundreds of millions of Muslims live in India, and so you've kind of had this multi-pronged assault on the Muslim community that's accelerating in its intensity and its severity lately. So you've had basically anti-Muslim pogroms kind of roaming the countryside. There have been, in the last couple of days, dozens of Muslims have been killed by in riots, and then also kind of the acceleration of a handful of kind of bureaucratic and legislative attempts to do what I think the economists called ethnic cleansing by bureaucracy. So there, as you mentioned, the kind of citizenship bill that was being pursued by the Modi government to make it harder for Muslims to gain citizenship within India, and then also the occupation of Kashmir and the blockade up there. So it's kind of this kind of all-out assault on the Muslim community there, and it's something that's kind of been going on for months, but in the last couple of days we've seen really accelerate, and it's gotten quite acute.
What is the ideological origins of where this comes from? Explain the terms RSS and BJP to people and where Modi specifically fits into this.
Right. So Modi kind of got his start in the RSS, which is it's kind of a Hindu nationalist kind of paramilitary volunteer organization. And in the early 2000s, Modi kind of rose through the ranks as a propagandist for that group. So that's it's a group that kind of views it's a Hindu nationalist group at its core. So views kind of the Indian nationality as one that's bound up with Hinduism exclusively. And so that's I think that kind of gives you the ideological scaffolding to this whole thing. And from there, Modi became kind of a rising star, and he got into the government formally, and he was the chief minister of Gujarat in the early 2000s, and kind of he rose as the face of this movement through the BJP, which is the political party that he represents, and is now obviously the highest ranking member of. And as prime minister, leads the majority position that they hold.
And is BJP sort of subsumed by the RSS? Like, if the RSS is a broad kind of almost paramilitary or sort of broad NGO organization, has publishing, community organizations, businesses, propaganda units, would it be fair to say that the BJP actually, as a political party, is almost an extension, not formally and legally, but that it isn't like the RSS is a cultural addendum that supports the BJP. It's more that the BJP is the electoral vehicle of the RSS?
I think that's fair to say, yeah. It's a pretty broad, it's exactly as you described, right? It's a very broad kind of political alliance, but certainly the RSS is, given Modi's ties and given where the country's at currently, is very much in the driver's seat of this of the party as it's conceived. So yeah, it's certainly central to the operation as it currently exists.
One other piece of history that we should use to set this before we get specifically to the Obama administration relationship, and of course, we'll go to Trump, and it makes total sense why Trump and Modi and other anti-Muslim authoritarians would be friendly with each other. But Obama was quite friendly with Modi, even beyond basic geopolitics. But the other thing that we need to put in here is what happened when Modi was governor of Gujarat in 2002, or the chief minister of Gujarat in 2002. Can you explain that history again to everybody?
Absolutely, yeah. So in 2002, there was, an infamous incident. It became known as the Gujarat riots, and how it began was there was a train full of Hindu pilgrims, and it was on the way to some religious event in Gujarat, and a kind of it's still kind of contested exactly what happened, but essentially a fight broke out on the train, and a number of those Hindu pilgrims were killed in this fight. And the backlash that kind of arose from that moment was intense and widespread. And what ended up happening was that it's estimated that 1,000 Muslims were killed basically in anti-Muslim riots across the state in the wake of this event on the train. And Modi, as essentially the governor of Gujarat at that time, basically the most generous thing to say about his contribution was that he stood idly by. Later investigations seem to indicate that he was basically encouraging of this anti-Muslim violence. And so the descriptions of what actually happened are so grisly, it's almost hard to imagine. Yeah. But it was the violence was immense. It was brutal. It went on for quite a long time, and by the time the death count occurred, and it was upwards of 1,000 people, it was pretty clear that this was something that Modi at least tacitly encouraged as an event. So it was a shameful and violent moment, and something kind of set the tone here that I think is really important to remember as we see this violence kind of cropping back up.
So fast forward then to, and what year is Modi first elected Prime Minister of India? I believe is it 2014?
I think that's correct, yeah.
So he's emerging, and there's several years where he is an international pariah. I believe he's not allowed to visit the United States. The national BJP, which is still part of the same, extremist ideology, but he's actually for a little while not, maybe a bit sidelined in the party. And he's emerging, though. He's reassumed leadership of the party. He's leading in the polls in 2014. And President Obama has to deal with this, right? And I think we can go into the bigger questions of U.S. foreign policy and empire and things that we absolutely should. But that being said, put a really fine point on this, this isn't like Barack Obama saying, look, this guy is about to be in charge of the world's largest democracy. This is an incredibly strategically important country for us. It's a counterweight to China. There's a big business relationship. It's an emerging economy. There's a major Indian population in the United States. Obviously, I'm going to have to build some sort of relationship. He does a lot more than that. Can you explain that?
Absolutely, yeah. And I think another kind of element that needs to be brought up here is that in Obama's second term, he had basically been thwarted on domestic policy at basically every level. So having lost the House and the Senate, was basically incapable of doing anything domestically, and the real power of the presidency at that point obviously resides in foreign policy. So Obama kind of turned to his foreign policy as a signature component of his second term. And one of these, what I would argue is essentially a signature move within that kind of international statesmanship campaign that he was part of, was the way that he dealt with Modi as Modi ascended through the ranks politically. And as you said, Modi was on the international radar screen for a long time, and he was very much a pariah. But in 2014, he becomes prime minister, and rather than taking a really hard line with him, or working to ensure that these extreme anti-Muslim views are going to at least be curtailed or sidelined, Obama reaches out to him and basically brings him into the fold as a personal guest at the White House. He brings him to the country multiple times to preside over a session of Congress, and he goes himself to India on multiple occasions, all with the idea that Modi is going to liberalize the economy and create more favorable business conditions for the American business class. And so he kind of gives Modi almost a blank check in just just because Modi indicates that he's open to some market-friendly reforms, and that kind of sets the tone here, kind of going forward.
What is the role of a guy who some people might be familiar with, one of the most odious presences on Morning Joe, always freaking out about Bernie Sanders, or freaking out enough? Steve Ratner. Who's Steve Ratner? What's his kind of background and potential background? And what role did he play in the linkage between Modi and Obama?
Yeah, Ratner's an interesting character, and it's his kind of permanent role on morning news on MSNBC and these places is certainly a funny one. He's a Wall Street guy. He was a financier, and he got basically busted for running what was essentially a scam with the New York State Pension Fund in around, let's say, towards the turn of the decade there, 2007, 2008. Obama appointed him to write the auto bailout, despite being essentially a white collar criminal. And then he kind of stayed within the Obama orbit. And when Obama was engaged in this kind of rehabilitation of Modi as a kind of rough around the edges, true believer in markets that the Western world should get on board with. Ratner kind of did the rounds, did the cable television rounds, and talked about how he had one point that India was actually not a site of injustice because it had less wealth equality than the United States in 2014. So he kind of
wealth inequality. You mean?
Yes, yeah,
oh, okay,
yeah, wealth inequality. Yeah, that's correct. And so he kind of he worked the various channels to soften the edges here and say, well, Modi, you might have concerns, but India is not so bad. That there's less wealth inequality there than there is here. So how bad can it be? And so he really helped part of the kind of wage this charm offensive in the mass media about Modi's reputation, and obviously is still kind of around doing similar work now for Michael Bloomberg, as both his money manager and as a talking head that regularly disparages the wealth tax and other kind of progressive positions from people like Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren.
Yeah, I was going to say the only time that he ever talked about closing the inequality gap is a good thing was when he was defending to Narendra Modi, as far as I can tell. Right. So okay, so now in the last several years, I guess I hesitate to do this, but I mean, the history is really clear and really established. Everybody knows who Modi is. People know what that ideology is. I could, and also even just a whole other terrain of really valid critiques, which is in fact all of these market reforms, which, we always know what that means. It's anti-labor, anti-poor, and it benefits local rich people and the U.S. investor class. We know all of this. I mean, certainly anybody listening to or watching this knows the, correct and familiar critique of Washington-led neoliberalization. I could see people who want to defend Obama in this sort of jumping up and down and saying, hey, he needed to have a relationship with Modi because of the strategic importance. And, didn't things get really bad in India after Obama was out of office? Didn't Modi make some noises when he first got into power of, not being somebody who would stand to the sidelines or probably even encourage and maybe even participate in the mass murder of Muslims, and by the way, also some Christians as well, that he was, kind of, sure, obviously a man of the right, but not this kind of brutal authoritarian ethnic cleanser we're seeing form now. Is that in any way, I mean, obviously I don't think so. Obama hasn't got an endless amount of Twitter followers. He could at least put one tweet out and say, hey, Narendra, that's not good. But that being said, I mean, is there a big qualitative difference in the behavior between Obama and Trump? And is that in any way exculpatory?
Well, I think that you're right to kind of set up those caveats that, of course, as the leading politician of the world's largest democracy, Obama can say, I'm not going to engage with this person at all under any circumstances and pretend he didn't exist. He had to engage with him. That's certainly true. But I do think that if you look at the track record of who he elevated, especially in places in the world where we're seeing democracy falter now, and even compared to George W. Bush. So I'd say that when Modi was ascending in 2005, he tried to get a visa to come to the United States and kind of workshop his image and get himself out there as an international figure. And the Bush administration decided that his track record was too odious and that they couldn't issue him a visa because of his record on religious violence because of those riots was so unequivocal that they refused to do it. And this is the Bush administration, right? And this is not a group of administrators that thought that violence against Muslims was such a horrible, unthinkable
the leading cause of violence against Muslims. The Abu Ghraib guys said you went too far. I think probably because there were Christians killed there too. I think, let's be real. But that being said, yes, they said no to Modi.
Right. Yeah. And so I think that, that's a pretty powerful comparison. And I think that too, if you look at who else Obama elevated or cozied up to during that period, you had Erdogan in Turkey, who initially the Obama administration was quite enthusiastic about. They were close. They initially said that they considered Mubarak to be an ally in Egypt, and then they said that Morsi was Mohamed Morsi in Egypt was someone that they kind of saw eye to eye with. So and now look at Egypt, look at Turkey, look at these democracies and where they are currently. They're teetering on the edge. And so I think that yes, you have to be realistic about the fact that as president of the United States, you have to forge alliances with people that maybe you don't like, and you can't pretend they're not there. But I do think that the Obama administration did a lot of work to elevate leaders that we knew their track records, we knew what they were interested in, and they've kind of taken that endorsement and kind of run these major democracies into the ground. And obviously, Trump has no real problem with that, but he's certainly not going to be a bulwark against it as we kind of get into this advanced stage of decline for India, Turkey, Egypt, and elsewhere.
Well, what do you make then in the last couple of minutes of that broader charge there, that broader critique that roughly, simply speaking, in the United States and across the sort of democratic world, the argument between the center right basically is, this is an aberration and we just need to go back to the politics of the 1990s and actually have fairly similar policies. Maybe we do need to, because again, don't forget that the very repressive and nasty policies towards immigrants and refugees were accelerated in the 90s in the United States and in Europe. But, yes, we shouldn't have these really particularly loud people like an Erdogan or a Modi or a Bolsonaro or a Trump. And then folks, as exemplified by Sanders, but others on the left who say, well, look here, like taking even just the Obama administration specifically, and I'm speaking for myself here, not certainly not, folks in a campaign or anything, but the policy sets that deindustrialized parts of the country, the utter rot of the political system, as Bill Fletcher Jr. says, right-wing populism is the herpes of capitalism. And then even more specifically, at the time that Obama's cozying with Modi, the DOJ is backing a right-wing, political task force in Brazil to destroy Lula and the Workers' Party, because quite obviously it seems that, because for all of their willingness to work with the United States, the Workers' Party is not willing to privatize and make allowable certain kind of key strategic assets to U.S. investors. The overlap there is obvious. So at what point do we say, like, not only do we need to kind of reach for much deeper reforms to deal with this authoritarian pull, but that actually the neoliberal leadership, for lack of a better term, was the sort of key conduit force for the Modis and the Bolsonaros and the Trumps of the world.
Oh yeah, I think that's absolutely. I think that's absolutely correct, and I think that's something that we've seen, over decades, is that that in fact the kind of liberal democracy playing nice with the neoliberal economic reforms, those two things don't necessarily go together very well, and in fact they oftentimes are at odds, and even in places where you have very limited democratic governance, it still ends up being sacrificed on the altar of business reforms. And it seems, absolutely, we can trace this out in a number of places, but the pull of the business class, the pull of the investor class, is going to supersede these these democratic ambitions, or these kind of the liberal democracy is going to fall short of basically the demands of the business class, and we've seen that over and over again. And so that certainly has set the tone, and in a lot of ways, I think was probably inevitable. I mean, the supremacy of that investor class, with that kind of wave of privatization and stuff, it just doesn't work with the democratic system, and we've seen that again and again, and this is now just the byproduct. And I think that it's certainly not an aesthetic problem that the leadership is ornery and unpleasant. It's a much bigger structural one, and I think that's kind of what. I think, as you wisely point out, that Sanders and other people have, primarily Sanders, and he was in fact the only one who was willing to condemn the violence in India.
Yeah, I think I just want to say specifically, it's not obviously, look, I support Sanders, that's obvious, but specifically if we're talking about foreign policy, I happen to think on domestic policy, it's completely, he's in a league of his own on domestic policy, I think, without question, but I get that people want to debate that. Setting that aside, nobody with any kind of straight face could debate this on foreign policy. He's the only one. And in fact, there was a tweet yesterday from a BJP leader in India responding to Sanders condemning human rights abuses, saying, we're going to need to respond, essentially threatening to interfere in this election, along, by the way, of course, with Israel, because, Sanders called Netanyahu a reactionary racist, and which is, again, it's obvious to anybody who knows anything, as well as calling for Lula to be free. So that isn't just like making a case for Sanders. I just think if we're going to talk about these things with any kind of seriousness, we need to be really real about what it actually means to take a step in the right direction of actually addressing these things, because kind of broad, hey, you should be nice to each other statements are not going to do anything when, in India, they, again, as you said, The Economist sees they are assembling an ethnic cleansing state while allowing people to literally lynch people in the country. This is happening right now.
Right, absolutely. And the right. It's just that the economic conditions, right, the economic policies that are sought by these people are consistent. They're the ones that neoliberal consensus has advocated for. And it's something that, if the pharmaceutical industry can erode the generic drug market in India, which is a big part of India is the foremost producer of generic drugs, well, they don't really have a huge issue with ethnic violence or ethnic cleansing by bureaucracy or however else you do it. If they can add to the portfolio, that has been fine, and that's been fine the world over, and that's been fine for many decades. And it absolutely comes down to the kind of way we think about the global economy. And in a lot of ways, this is the business class getting what they've sought for years, and it's not at odds with their goals. And so I think you're right to analyze it in those terms, because this foreign policy stuff is very much about the priorities of the economy, and it's about labor, and it's about a number of other things. So that's right on the money.
I'll trade you an Islamic detention center for a AIDS drug out of the generics. How about that?
Yeah, it's
let's write an op-ed about yoga together. It'll be great. By the way, that's not a joke. They did that. I think it was in the Washington Post, right?
Oh, is that so?
When Modi first visited the United States, him and Obama wrote it wasn't about yoga, but it was what they started with, ever since Swami Vivekananda came to the World Conference on Religions, we've had a special relationship. Oprah, stress relief. Anyways, all right, no more generic drugs, and in exchange, you can reverse the Mughal Empire or whatever. Cool. It's a really, really important piece in obviously a place in the world where a lot of horrifying things are happening right now. Alex, with the support of the U.S. corporate class. Alexander Sammon, the piece is Barack Obama's legacy is Narendra Modi. I appreciate your time.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on.
Thanks a lot. Take care. All right, folks, read that piece in the American Prospect. It'll be linked. Become a member of the Majority Report today, majority.fm/become a member. Check out justcoffee.coop, fair trade tea, coffee, or chocolate. Subscribe to the AM Quickie on iTunes. Immediately go become a patron, patreon.com/TMBS. This weekend, a illicit history and primer of the history of U.S. involvement in Afghanistan. What exactly is the Taliban today? The state of play in Syria, CIA, Gulf, Russia, where we are, and more with Derek Davidson. Don't miss our latest show with Benjamin Dixon and Richard Wolff. Next week, I'll be in LA with Nomiki Kantz. Grab your tickets. That's going to be an amazing thing. We're going to stream that on the Michael Brooks Show YouTube channel. Go over there and subscribe. And I believe we're going to be doing our main Michael Brooks show next Saturday. Get your tickets. April 3rd at the North Door in Austin, Texas. Anna Kasparian, Abby Martin. We are now well over a half sold out, so I would get them quickly. Patrons of the Michael Brooks Show just got an email announcing our live show in Boston in June. I would go to that link so you can get your Patreon discount to that live show this Sunday. Check out on my Twitter page, Twitter wall, or Daniel Denver's. Brianna, Daniel Denver, and I are going to be doing a podcast Sunday morning in Boston and then going and canvassing for Bernie Sanders. Patreon.com/TMBS. Matt.
My podcast, Literary Hangover. Check it out. Most recent episode on Bacon's Rebellion, which is something people should know about. So check it out.
Great. Check out the Nomiki Show and the Antifada. We'll see you in the fun half.
Left is best. Jamie and I may have a disagreement.
Yeah, you can't just say whatever you want about people just because you're rich.
I have an absolute right to mock them on YouTube.
He's up there buggy whipping like he's the boss.
I am not your employer.
I'm tired of the negativity.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to upset you. You're nervous, you're a little bit upset, you're riled up.
Yeah, maybe you should rethink your defense of that, you fucking idiots.
We're just going to get rid of you.
All right.
But dude. You want to smoke this joint?
Yes.
Do you feel like you are a dinosaur?
That's some good shit.
Exactly. I'm happy now.
It's a win-win.
It's a win-win-win.
Oh, hell yeah.
Now listen to me. 2, 3, 4, 5 times. 847-906-501-457. 2, 38, 56, 27. 1/2. 5 eighths. 3.9 billion.
Wow.
He's the ultimate math nerd.
Don't you see?
Why don't you get a real job instead of spewing vitriol and hatred, you left-wing Limbaugh?
Everybody's taking their dumb juice today.
Come on, Sammy.
Dance, dance, dance.
Ooh.
I had my first post-coital scene with a woman. I'm hoping to add more moves to my repertoire. All I have is the dip and the swirl.
Fine, we can double dip.
Yes, this is a perfect moment.
No.
Wait, what?
You make under $1 million a year. You're scum. You're nothing.
Excuse me? Fuck you, you fucking liberal elite. I think you belong in jail.
Thank you for saying that, Sam. You're a horrible, despicable person.
All right, gonna take a quick break. I want to take a moment to talk to some of the libertarians out there. Take whatever vehicle you want to drive to the library. What you're talking about is jibber jabber.
Classic. I'm feeling more chill already.
Good. Donald Trump can kiss all of our asses.
Hey, Sam. Hey, Andy. You guys ready to do some evil?
Hitler was such an idiot.
That guy might be a Nazi.
Agreed.
No.
Death to America.
You.
Yes.
Wow.
Wow, that's weird. No way! Unbelievable. This guy's got a really good hook. Throw our hands up.
Ooh.
Wow.
But Sam, I gotta get off.
No worries. Let's. I want to just flesh this out a little bit. I mean, look, it's a free speech issue. If you don't like me...
Hey, shut up!
Thank you for calling into the Majority Report. Sam will be with you shortly.
Do we have it? Welcome to the fun half. Trying to get the IMs together. Meanwhile, let's start out of the gate with a call. You're calling from a 308 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from? 308. Are you there? 308?
Oh.
Hello?
Hello?
Hello? Hey, it sounds like Kowalski to me. Are you there?
Indeed it is, yes.
How are you?
Absolutely no idea. Oh, not too bad.
Good to get to you. What's on your mind, my friend?
Well, in my never-ending quest of trying to share the wondrous news of our Lord and Savior Bernie Sanders' message of health care.
Yes.
I have another, just way of talking to your center friends, if you still have any left.
Tell me. Tell us.
So I'm to the point where you just got to start normalizing it and make it basically the moderate position. So when you're talking about it from here on out, just point out, this is what most people want. It's the most practical thing to do. The current system isn't working. You guys don't have a plan. We do. Just be very nonchalant. Just be casual with it. Just be, this is the reasonable position. I don't understand why you guys don't have a reasonable position on it. It is very frustrating to a lot of people when you phrase it that way because they legitimately do not have a solution for it. So, yeah, I've been seeing a decent amount of success with that approach.
Okay, that's good to know. I think that's pretty good. I caught an interview on the Intercept Intercept. What is Scahill's one? Intercepted with Jesse Jackson. And there's a lot to learn from Jesse Jackson, particularly his 88 campaign, the Rainbow Coalition campaign. People will look back historically. I mean, in some ways that is a very direct precursor of Bernie Sanders. And he said in the interview, I forget how he put it, but essentially that healthcare for everybody is the moral center. He was very cleverly using, I think centrist language is problematic when there's nothing wrong with owning decommodifying healthcare is a left position and the left position is the right position and left is best, right? On the other hand, I think in addition to what you're saying, which is true and can definitely be effective for some people because they don't have any answers because single payer is the obvious choice. I think there's also nothing wrong with the morality dimension. There is just an absolute base.
Talking earlier about the death tolls from capitalism or socialism, 40,000 Americans dying every single year as a result of not having access to health care. It's just pathetic. Everyone boasts, we're the wealthiest and most powerful nation on the earth. How? How are 40,000 dying every year then?
Exactly. Kowalski, appreciate it as always.
That wealth is bought by not paying for health care for people.
Right.
Apparently.
Yeah, right. We know why.
If that's why we're the most wealthy country is the price worth it? Is it worth being the wealthiest country on the planet if there's child hunger and people are going into medical debt? No. Absolutely not.
Right.
So we can look at cool buildings.
that aren't even cool. You're calling from a 919 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from? (919). Are you there?
Is this me?
Yeah, it's you. What's your name and where are you calling from?
Oh, hey. Yeah. Hi, I'm Rishwajit calling from India.
Sorry, will you tell me your name just one more time, please?
Yeah, it's a tough one. It's Rishwajit from India.
Rashudit from India.
No, but...
Oh, sorry. My bad.
Yeah,
okay.
That's all right.
I did my best. Okay, please tell us what's on your mind. Thanks for calling.
Yeah, I just wanted to update you on the situation that the programs that have been happening in India and answer some questions if you might have.
Okay.
So, just like a couple hours ago, the Delhi High Court judge who was presiding over this case.
Which case, please tell everybody. We tell everybody which case, please.
Right. Yes. This program, I guess, started with a BJP/RSS minister who gave an inflammatory speech to the Hindu nationalist mob, right? And he said that as soon as Trump left, he would clear out the sit-in protests that have been happening for over 70 days now, which were happening without any violence, and the rhetoric was clean. They were using constitutional terms, and he said he would clear out those protests by any means necessary. And he had this whole mob with him. And, the justice system here is not very good. You can't really rely upon the judiciary to uphold the law, but this judge was like one of the most consistent judges, and he opened a case on the minister for hate speech and inciting violence. But as soon as he did that, the executive transferred him out of Delhi. So the chances of us getting justice in this case are looking real slim now.
And so that also shows the parallel part of this process, because I remember interviewing Soumya Shankar before the election, and her point was that from the perspective of justice and labor and anti-minority and anti-Muslim sentiment, obviously it was already a terrible thing that Modi was in power, but that the second term, and I think we could certainly see some echoes in the United States, the second term was the term that would mean the formal assault on what is institutionally, at least, and constitutionally written, a very strong democratic system in India. Now, again, there's a lot of flaws, and that implementation has not been there, like hasn't been anywhere else. But this is the phase where we go from inciting these things, discoursing these things, but now we're just going fully towards, we're going to, the judge, nope, sorry, we're removing you. More of this sort of formal rollback of the democratic state. Is that a correct interpretation?
Yeah, so we see this as part of the pattern we've been seeing since '84 with the Sikh genocide, and then the 2002 Gujarat anti-Muslim riots again, and now we're seeing this. So this pattern of violence has been consistent with the Indian state, but with the coming of Modi, we see an ideology that did not exist before. I mean, it did, but he changed things here. The ideology specifically calls for Muslims to be eliminated, right? So this assault has become more formalized and institutionalized.
Anything else you want to add? Anything else? I mean, in any way we could be even remotely helpful?
Just elect Bernie, because he is the only foreign policy candidate. He is the one you want to elect if you want international justice and solidarity. That's it. Because as soon as he gave that comment, Indian media went in a frenzy, and like everyone was accusing him of being like an ISI agent, and like because of his campaign manager being Pakistani, and all of these.
You're going to hear a ton of that. Faz is. You are going to hear in the coming months the one node of propaganda. There's going to be a huge amount from Israeli and Indian stuff that Faz is Pakistani, Faz is Muslim. And I also would be very wary. I do think the depress the turnout thing, a lot of it will come indirectly, but I think from some similar sources of, he's a sellout and the DNC and all of that crap. So India and the BJP government are going to be another place, again, like Israel, because there's been their willingness from Bernie to call out, the Israeli apartheid state and now the pogrom ethnic cleanse state in India. There's a huge amount of influence and money to put around, and then also Saudi and the Gulf. So it really is Bernie verse. But one last question for you: would you what about traveling to India now? Would it be better if people from the States and elsewhere came to India and, particularly if they're in a position to maybe talk about it on platforms and try to connect with left voices and other humanitarian, efforts, and also obviously just to see the place. It's an incredible country. Or would it be better to not, put dollars in right now?
No. So there's one thing Modi is scared about, and that's criticism from international press and people outside India, really. So that is one thing we need to amplify as much as we can, right? So I was on the line a couple of days ago to get on the show and talk about this, but there was really no coverage happening. There was the Washington Post article and Chris Hayes' show. He had a segment on that, but there was not really much happening. But as soon as Bernie put out the statement and he really amplified the thing, and people on leftist Twitter have at least been talking about that more now. So I really think we need to amplify the situation happening in India as much as we can, and because the pogroms are happening as we speak. I got a call from my friends who were in the protest an hour ago, and there was a shooting just near the protest site my friends were in, and that was really scary. So this it's a dangerous situation, and we need to do as much as we can to get this out and talk about
solidarity. Sorry, go ahead.
No. As for traveling and talking to people here and connecting, I think that's one of the best things you could do, right?
Great. That's my instinct. I think that somehow we have equated, we should absolutely be pushing for on the business sector level and, if power ever changes for things like boycott, divestment, sanctions against the BJP government and against Israel and so on. But exactly. I think on the citizenship, travel and engagement level, I think it's maybe not 100%, but I think it's almost always the right call to engage with human beings, wherever they are, and see and communicate and engage. And I think that should be made a very clear distinction between that and what we're calling for with regards to business. So I'm glad to hear that. But I wanted your perspective. Thanks so much for the call.
Thank you.
All right, let's get to some sound, and let's start with Thomas Friedman. Thomas Friedman is somebody who's been a joke for a long time. Matt Taibbi kind of had the classical pieces on Thomas Friedman's sort of, I think he called it middle management bullshit.
He's the suck on this guy from our intro.
He's the suck on this guy from our intro, which was, of course, his comments about invading Iraq, which has killed over 1 million people. But more recently, he was writing love letters to Mohammed bin Salman in Saudi Arabia. A major friend of any type of, a mouthpiece of the corporate intelligence and, quote unquote, intelligence apparatus of the United States. Beating Donald Trump is going to be very hard. And all empirical evidence that we have is that Bernie Sanders is the one by far with the best chance to do it. If people on the socialist left were narcissists and didn't care about the fate of this country and the world, or just even what that gentleman just said about what Bernie's already doing, just even by tweeting in a way with moral clarity that no other candidate has in terms of stopping pogroms in India, I could totally see, you know what? You want to steal this from us? You want to endlessly propagandize? No other candidates won't drop out. They're going to demonize him. They're going to lie about him. They're going to smear his movement. They're going to whine about bros. They're going to talk about stealing the convention, and they're going to have a war against him. And it's in cable news, and God even knows what the military industrial complex interests are going to do. You know, all of this stuff. You know what? Fine. Go ahead. Nominate one of these losers. Give Donald Trump a second term. And it will be horrible for the world and horrible for the United States, but we will be even more vindicated. Instead, what we're actually trying to do is fight through all of this nonsense and all of this garbage and the entire American oligarchic machine, which is anti-humanity and anti-democracy, to fight against Donald Trump in what will be an uphill battle against an incumbent president who's relatively popular after 3 years of utter failure by the Democratic establishment and being able to look, they got Congress. Good for them. That's great. But I hand that much more to the grassroots activist class, and actually reining him in since 2018, they've totally failed. The public narratives have failed. They don't even spend any time really highlighting or talking about or attacking or, of course, God forbid, defunding things like concentration camps of immigrants. They're completely intellectually and politically failed and morally failed. And then we're going to go go up against Trump, who's well positioned to get reelected, of course, without the real substantive support of the Democratic leadership class and the oligarchs that fund it. We're still going for it because we actually care about the fate of this country. And this is what we're up against. This is distilled here. This is Thomas Friedman, who was the biggest cheerleader of corporate globalization in the 90s, a big, invade Iraq, love MBS in Saudi Arabia, all the rest of it. Here he is on CNN talking about, and remember, and this is partially why I do get so pissed off and irritated in these conversations. I like Bernie Sanders. I think I think he's treated terribly. I think it's kind of gross. And I don't think any person should be, treated terribly, frankly. So sure. But it's also a stand-in for the absolute contempt that these people have for working and poor people in this country. This is a movement and a campaign that, in addition to winning, and in addition to obviously being the only one that's going to get the most votes and delegates, has generated tens of millions of dollars in activity, in literal contributions and blood, sweat, and tears from teachers, from Amazon employees, from Walmart employees. This is the type of thing when, I get pissed off when I think the Sanders campaign is making a mistake. Or frankly, part of the reason that, again, I know some people still want to indulge this, but I have no time for all of the Warren bullshit. It's not just because I like Sanders better. Obviously I do. It's because it's a stand-in for tens of millions of people that these people all have nothing but contempt for. Check out this clip of Thomas Friedman.
Bernie Sanders' faction represents, 30, 35, maybe 40% of just the Democratic Party. But that's all. They can't win an election with 35% of the party, and they certainly can't hold the House with that. They certainly can't take over the Senate with that, and they couldn't possibly govern effectively with that. So there's got to be some kind of gathering of the elders of the party, whether it's Schumer and Pelosi or President Obama. I don't know who. That's got to come together. These people need some adult leadership here right now. If you watched that debate last night, you watched the last few debates, it was squabbling children. It was really frightening. It was not uplifting. It was not reassuring.
You wrote recently, earlier in the month, that Michael Bloomberg is the candidate best suited to defeat Donald Trump. You still believe that?
Well, yeah, I think Mike he had a better debate last night. I do believe he's someone who can actually bring the different wings of the party together, and he has the resources, and I think the tough.
Okay, yeah, I mean, look,
he's got the resources.
Yeah, he definitely has the resources. He's an oligarch, and you can see now we're fully entering the phase. I'll get to that in a second, actually. I want to complete this thought, but I want to just tease that we are fully entering the phase. The Republican Party is an authoritarian party. It is an authoritarian project. And now we are formally entering the centrist Democratic class, they want to live in Singapore. And we'll get to that in a second. But look, newest polls, political polls out.
This one is an A+ rating by 538, this pollster. So
this is an A+ rating. Pennsylvania, which is a must-win state, will start from the bottom to the top. Trump versus Bloomberg, Trump 48, Bloomberg 45. Trump versus Buttigieg, Trump 46, Buttigieg 45. Trump versus Klobuchar, Trump 45, Klobuchar 44. Trump versus Warren, they're tied at 47. Trump versus Biden, tied at 47. Sanders 49, Trump 46. Now, this is all really close, and this is going to require an extraordinary amount of effort. And I remember people who, by the way, who had nothing but contempt for Bernie Sanders and for working people in 2016, and who also thought it was in the bag against Donald Trump because they were arrogant morons who had no understanding of the electorate or strategy. They're still whining and bleeding today that Bernie Sanders stuck around to try to create a progressive Democratic Party platform. That apparently was hugely damaging to Hillary Clinton. These people are out every day on television smearing, lying about, defaming, and suggesting that they formally end democracy to stop Bernie Sanders. So, and then to think, that's really the part that catches me. There is the big danger. I thought in the beginning of this race that Bernie Sanders was very well poised to become the nominee and defeat Donald Trump. And I actually thought a year ago, coming out of 2018, that there were several people who might be poised to beat Donald Trump, primarily Sanders and Biden, but also possibly someone like Harris, who was definitely my biggest miscall of this. And I really thought the only real problem for Bernie is either Biden shows up and kind of knows what he's doing and there's a nostalgia and comfort factor, or somebody like Harris is able to maneuver her way into appeasing enough people on certain policy sets. And we all know, I agree with Sam, I don't think people necessarily vote out of policy, but enough to have some type of progressive momentum and then start to really show in polls, because electability would always be crucial, that they could actually defeat Donald Trump. And I thought, my point was, if you had a candidate in the line of who Democrats have nominated, the only Democratic presidents in the modern era, Bill Clinton and Barack Obama, will be remembered primarily for their extraordinary personal political skill. There's no real daylight ideologically between Barack Obama, Bill Clinton, John Kerry, Al Gore, and Hillary Clinton and Michael Dukakis. They all have various differences. Probably Al Gore maybe is, sure, he's a bit better than Hillary Clinton. Obama's a bit better than, all of them, arguably. But they're in the same ideological grid. And Bill Clinton and Obama win because they're extraordinarily charismatic. That's it. So I thought if there was somebody in that lane who could get out there and be the person that just says, I'm going to synthesize the competing demands of the party, and I can beat Donald Trump with a certain type of energy and presentation on television. That candidate does not exist. So we're in a point now where you have people and I don't know whether, like, again, with Thomas Friedman, I think he's actually genuinely insane. And I also think, I'd have to double check it, but I've read somewhere, I think that Mike Bloomberg's funding his wife's museum. And, he's married into an extraordinary amount of money, and he's nothing but an establishment mouthpiece, and it makes no difference for him materially and personally one way or another, whether or not, Trump is reelected. So it is all ideologically and self-interested determined. But I also think he's insane. I think he really is demented enough and nuts enough, and thinks that, talking to a Egyptian cab driver is a stand-in for public opinion, that he actually thinks that a charisma-free oligarch with a horrifying record on every single major issue, which Donald Trump could run rhetorical and demagogic circles around in his sleep, actually is the person to beat Trump. It shows you that they're anti-democratic, obviously, which we'll get to in a second, but it also shows you that, there's no there. I mean, this is the establishment that we're up against, and they have all of the money and the power and material resources, and it's a huge fight, but they're fucking nuts and stupid. Like that is an insane piece of political analysis, that there is not one person there. If this race was Bernie has this incredible coalition and he's winning and he has momentum, and then there's a Harris candidate or a Beto O'Rourke candidate who isn't quite clearing the threshold. There's a Buttigieg style candidate who's actually getting a lot of votes from people of color, but the field is too diffuse. Okay. It would still overall be a bullshit argument, because at some point you just have to say the person who's winning is winning, and calling for an end to democracy is a problem in and of itself, an end to a democratic process, ignoring a democratic process. But you would have the footholding of a way to BS on television, coming out and saying the miserable little oligarch who is spending the entire debate talking about sexual harassment NDAs, stop and frisk, has no communicative ability, has an alienating record for conservative swing voters as well as progressives, whose only support and existence is purely a function of money, could beat Trump on a cut Social Security, ban soda and guns platform. I'm going to have to rein myself in a second here, because I'm aware I'm becoming repetitive, but I cannot stress that level of stupidity and insanity actually causes me anxiety, because the Republican establishment has a infinitely better understanding of what's happening in the normal world of their electorate than any people who are speaking in the Democratic Party like Thomas Friedman.
Reminds me of one of my favorite sections from Orwell's Lion and the Unicorn, which he talks about the British liberal ruling class. Says basically about the ruling class. By 1920, there were many people who were aware of the unusefulness of basically the ruling class. By 1930, millions were aware of it. But the British ruling class obviously could not admit to themselves that their usefulness was at an end. Had they done that, they would have to abdicate, for it was not possible for them to turn themselves into mere bandits like the American millionaires, consciously clinging to unjust privileges by beating down opposition by bribery and tear gas bombs. After all, they belonged to a class with a certain tradition. That they had been to public schools where the duty, don't forget, blah, blah, blah. I'm going to skip a bit forward. They had to feel themselves true patriots even while they plundered their countrymen. Clearly, there was only one escape for them into stupidity. They could keep society in its existing shape only by being unable to grasp that any improvement was possible. Difficult though this was, they achieved it largely by fixing their eyes on the past and refusing to notice the changes that were going on around them.
Yes. And let's be really clear when we talk about this. And of course, the American establishment and liberal establishment and cable news denied this with the Republican Party for ages. They still deny it for the Republican Party, right? Everybody on MSNBC, they've got national security state ghouls and people who don't like Donald Trump because he tweets, right? But for a very long time, exemplified by Barack Obama and Joe Biden, the fever will break. That's what Obama said. The Republican Party, who spread racist and vicious lies about him, who would not compromise on right-wing proposals that he put forward to cut Social Security and Medicare. Nope. You need to lose. We'll destroy you. In 2016, they elect Donald Trump. And even in the beginning, many people were like, well, I think Mitch McConnell and Paul Ryan care about America. Finally, there is some slight buy-in, but somewhat there, although not by Joe Biden, not by many of the Democrats, but a fair amount of people, to really recognize that the Republican Party has a authoritarian flavor to it, that they look at politics maybe the way someone like Erdogan looks at politics, which is maybe you have elections, maybe we're going to suppress a lot of voters, we're going to try to have the elections on our terms, but we'll have an election. Then when we win, you shut up. You're done. We'll pass laws in state legislatures across the country to criminalize protests. We will go after people's voting rights. We'll go after people's civil rights. We're going to formally say that basically the president can commit any crime he wants, whatever. And then on the flip side, we're not going to give your Supreme Court, justice a hearing. Like, power is power. That's it. Fuck you. Okay. For 3 years, the Democratic Party establishment has used these convenient talking points about the popular will, and all of a sudden, even though they never did anything about the Electoral College, which is patently undemocratic, all of a sudden, oh, that's wrong, and Hillary Clinton got 3 million more votes. You have Thomas Friedman coming out on television, and then you want to say, okay, Thomas Friedman is just some columnist. Well, there's a piece in the New York Times. Democratic Party leaders willing to risk party damage to stop Bernie Sanders. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer, the minority leader, hear constant warnings from allies about congressional losses in November if the party nominates Bernie Sanders for president. And then it goes on to talk with a variety of superdelegates who suggest, and this article, I'll quote now, this article is based on an interview with 93 superdelegates out of 771 total, as well as party strategists and aides. And believe me, I believe strategists. Okay. Rich donors who hate the Bernie policy agenda because they're protecting their money, pretty obvious. And strategists whose whole career is predicated on essentially getting money funneled through those rich donors for running corporate congressional candidates' campaigns are obviously not that excited about a new class of politics either. I mean, these are the ones with very obvious, very base material self-interest. I've had 60 years of experience with and they go on in this article to suggest a variety of possible candidates that a convention that, let's be really clear about what a broker convention means. It means that every dollar a working person has donated to Bernie Sanders, you're lighting on fire. Every door that has been knocked on doesn't count. Every vote that has been cast, every piece of democratic will here, done. Incidentally, against a president that we know almost certainly if he loses, and he will not lose, because if there is a brokered convention and it's stolen from Bernie Sanders, whoever that nominee is, will lose massively to Donald Trump. But we know that Donald Trump will not recognize losing, and Bill Barr will support him in that. And this Democratic Party bullshit is the most helpful thing in the world for that. And I don't want to hear anything about, but what about the Russians? They did, Rastafarians who hate Hillary on Facebook. I don't want to hear any of that crap. We're talking real here. So the names that they have put forward include, I think Michelle Obama was one. She is enormously popular. She's never indicated she wants to run for anything and has no electoral experience. But also Chris Coons, who I've been saying that Mike Bloomberg would lose by the biggest margin. Well, we finally found a name that Donald Trump would hand a Ronald Reagan to Walter Mondale type beatdown of the miserable Chris Coons. So I think inside the Democratic Party, and we cannot underestimate, I'm somewhere in between, I guess, folks on the show on this. I think that actually, as Bernie continues to win, these things might consolidate very quickly. Conversely, I think it's terrifying and horrific that these superdelegates are publicly musing about doing this, that Elizabeth Warren is specifically campaigning in a way where there's no way she's going to win. Frankly, maybe she'll win her home state, won't win anything else, and is specifically talking about going into a convention, canceling the will of the majority of people and becoming a candidate. This is all enormously damaging stuff for democracy that all of these people are doing. But I think that a lot of it is panic, stupidity, and craven self-interest. But in the Bloomberg-Thomas Friedman axis, which overlaps with this, they are coming out on television and saying the adults need to take over. That means things like, you know what? Maybe we should just have a small stakeholder system. Maybe before we have elections, both of the party committees should sit down and decide who the acceptable group of candidates are. maybe we need to process the candidates through a vetting system designed by the Alphabet Corporation. We are already not far from that because of the functional money that the corporate influence has already played in this process, essentially doing that weeding process for them until this grassroots Sanders movement and the revitalization starting with Occupy. So be very clear that this whole superdelegates throw out the will of the people thing is actually even a bigger conversation. I look, don't speculate about what they'll do at the convention. We're going to keep going forward. Bernie needs to win by a big margin, and we'll all be at the convention one way or another. And believe me, if they try to pull any bullshit, there's going to be a lot of response, and they'll lose anyways. But, look, for some of them, I think they would prefer to lose because they can keep, fundraising and consulting or whatever. But the bigger structural problem is that, and the overused phrase, the mask off moment is maybe the columns that I write praising how Singapore does a quote unquote managed democracy, or this other model here is really a lot more efficient when you think about it. Maybe it's not just going to be wish fulfillment and propaganda on behalf of U.S. corporate interests overseas. Maybe it's time, just as the Paul Ryan budget and just as what the Europeans did to Greece inside the Eurozone, just as all of those things were owed their model to what the World Bank and IMF administered across the developing world and still does to this day in terms of austerity, increasing poverty, paving the way for pharma and oil and all sorts of Western interests to exploit those countries. And then all of a sudden, maybe we need to actually do that at home too. Maybe now we need to do that at home as well. Maybe we need to have a managed democracy here. And that is what a Bloomberg-Trump race means. That means we are formally not we're not in a democracy anymore. We are formally in a plutocratic contest that has been preset. And yes, we've been very close to there, but I want to make a distinction. We actually weren't there yet. And part of the reason we weren't there yet is because we didn't even have an alternative tested model that had started to win yet. And that is, again, another reason why in 2016, it wasn't the same case. Of course, the Democratic Party was biased in favor of Hillary. Of course, the thumb was on the scale. Of course, there was all sorts of dirty dealing, whatever. And at the end of the day, Bernie Sanders ran an incredible campaign and won over 20 states, and Hillary Clinton got 5 million more votes than him. So the lesson was wow, there is an opening. Go, go, go. If this time we win, and this is the result of it, which is we need the adults in charge, that's them formally saying, we don't want to do this democratic thing anymore. We don't even want to pretend that there's the mechanisms in place that you can get around the corporate oligarchic lock. And again, read about Singapore, read about these models, because that is the future of the world, including in the United States, if we do not win. And we already see that on the right. But recognize where that is in the so-called center.
People got mad at me based on how pissed off I got at the Working Families Party endorsement thing. But all that was I want to know how people are voting, because I want to know how actually strong Elizabeth Warren is, because I think democracy actually is important. And if we're really willing to throw that shit over for expedience, we're effed.
And the reason, look, I think Bernie Sanders did that in 2016. I'm how things are working and what they're doing in discourse now. So that's a talking point that or a fact or whatever that isn't helpful in the current context. That being said, I remember Matt and I specifically saying that's a bad idea, because it is a bad idea. Like, first of all, yes, it was different rules at the time. The superdelegates meant a different thing in the process. And I think at the end of the day, they were using it to try to put political muscle towards having a good platform, which is the opposite of what Warren is doing.
Right. Well, that's the thing, right? So we can all agree that from a grown-up standpoint that Bernie in 2016 and Warren now didn't have a chance to actually win that, right?
That's exactly
so
right.
Then we can move on. Okay, so that's what the campaigns are saying. Let's move on to the real reason they're doing it and assess it based on that. And I think I am fine with what Bernie did in 2016, and I'm not fine with what Warren is doing now. I don't think they're the same
Bernie was
environment.
trying to cause a little bit of a stink to influence a platform. Warren is trying to go into a convention, destroy, discredit, spit in the face of tens of millions of people, or millions of people who've put blood, sweat, and tears and money into a democratic experiment as part of a brokered, illegitimate, technically whatever, but democratically illegitimate process. That is a fundamentally different thing. And by the way, I'll just say it again, just to state really clearly, I wish that no one in the Sanders campaign in 2016 had even floated that. So let's disaggregate and not make a stupid, ridiculous, false parallel. But one thing that we should actually be pretty goody two-shoes about and pretty fundamentalist about is one person, one vote. That's actually something we really should hold. That's why we need to get rid of the Electoral College. We need to get rid of all of these games. You vote, and your vote is as good as anybody else's vote. And yes, when it comes to civil rights and protections and all these other complexities, we need mechanisms to protect minorities. We need a legislative process. But the electoral game has to come down to a broad, simple metric. Whoever gets the most votes wins. Done.
Should we just hear what Bernie was actually saying about superdelegates here? This is Walker Bregman put this
And this is what Bernie was actually saying in 2016.
I'm going to try to convince those superdelegates when it's all said and done to go with you instead of Hillary Clinton. You've made a distinction between superdelegates from states you've won, that you think those superdelegates should go for you. So will you not try to convince any superdelegate who comes from a state that you did not win in the primary and caucus process?
Right. Look, this is what I think. If I win, or Hillary Clinton, if that is your point, Hillary Clinton won Mississippi by a huge vote. Should I convince superdelegates there to vote for me when she won that state overwhelmingly? No, I shouldn't. But we won states, like Washington, Alaska, Hawaii, New Hampshire, in landslide victories. And I do believe that the superdelegates, whether it's, Clinton's or mine, states that we won, superdelegates in states where a candidate wins a landslide victory should listen to the people in those states and vote for the candidate chosen by the people.
Well, that's already, that argument is, I was not giving them enough credit.
Right.
That's
a whole lot of people haven't been giving Bernie enough credit.
That's an excellent argument. Well, people never give the guy enough credit, but that's an excellent argument. That's actually an indirect way of saying we should get rid of them, which obviously we should. They attempted to and they couldn't. You know what? We weren't going to get to it, but let's just play what Warren said, just so we can be very clear here about what is actually being said. And what disgusts me about what Warren is doing is not just that look, personally, I could promise you 100%, some folks might not believe this, if Bernie Sanders was a distant third in Iowa, got embarrassed in New Hampshire and lost Nevada and was in fourth or fifth in South Carolina, I would say drop out. I wouldn't tell him who to endorse. I would be miserable. I'm sure I would write some resentful posts or whatever, but I'd be like, dude, you lost. That's it. We tried, it failed. Okay. So I think trying to Rube Goldberg your way to the nomination in a way that you are not only not going to get the most votes, like you're going to be in vote totals like in the bottom of the field, right? I think that's disgusting in and of itself. But the bigger problem that I have is that this kind of game playing and this kind of bureaucracy over democracy, one is, again, is ridiculous and totally dishonest about what Sanders was saying, but it's empowering the Thomas Friedman stuff at a time when more and more folks who have a lot of power are starting to feel culturally sanctioned in saying that they don't want to do democracy anymore.
For a software company here in Charleston, he is currently supporting Senator Sanders. Jason.
Hi, Jason.
Hey now, Senator Warren. Welcome to Charleston.
Thank you.
During the Nevada debate, you and every other candidate on the stage, except for Bernie, hello somebody, indicated that the candidate with the plurality of delegates should not necessarily be the nominee. This essentially means the will of the voters could be denied by the superdelegates and the DNC, which is basically undemocratic. And in my opinion, is a bunch of baba booey, to put it politely. Can you explain why the will of the voters should not matter if no candidate reaches a majority of delegates?
So you do know that was Bernie's position in 2016.
Pause it. So actually, and I didn't even know this at the time, it was not. We just saw. So that's dishonest, in my opinion.
Not necessarily, no. He won 22 states, so he went to the convention.
That was
for
Bernie's
voters.
position in 2016, that it should not go to the person who had a plurality.
Yep.
So, and remember, his last play was to superdelegates. So the way I see this is you write the rules before you know where everybody stands, and then you stick with those rules. So for me, Bernie had a big hand in writing these rules. I didn't write them. But Bernie did when they were putting together the 2016 platform for the Democratic Convention. Those are the rules that he wanted to write and others wanted to write. Everybody got in the race thinking that was the set of rules. I don't see how come you get to change it just because he now thinks there's an advantage to him for doing it.
All right. So you saw the clip. So, okay. First of all, go to Nomiki. Nomiki will explain that they didn't, quote, write the rules. They got into the room to contest the rules and won a few reforms and lost.
So another misleading statement.
Yeah,
from
it's
Warren.
a totally misleading statement. That's like saying that, well, hey, don't blame, hey, this section of the Civil Rights Act is unenforceable or limited. Hey, well, don't blame me. Martin Luther King wrote it. I mean, it's an exaggeration, but it's on that continuum. That's a very misleading, mean-spirited statement.
Notice how when Bernie was asked, when in a similar position as many people are pointing out, he stressed the importance of democracy. Elizabeth Warren stressed the importance of the rules.
Process, yeah.
That's right. Well, and look, she's a corporate lawyer. That's who she is. But
I apologize to Bernie for not knowing how actually what his position on superdelegates was better than it sounded.
Yeah.
A lot of people reduced it, including, frankly, on this show.
Yeah, absolutely. Because that perspective, our mistake. More credit to Bernie.
Eric Levitz was tweeting about it this morning, too. A lot of people.
No, he was making that case at some point.
But that
he
the
was
way,
making the case
but that's
that
a different, the way he just.
No, you can talk in two ways. You can have your surrogates like Jeff Weaver go out and say, look, in a general election, we think superdelegates should consider us because we have a better path to victory than Hillary Clinton does. And you can go on Face the Nation and say that. Well, that's a qualification of what Jeff Weaver said.
That's but that's what he put out as the principle in his campaign right there is actually a different statement than we're going for all superdelegates. And ultimately, the buck does stop with him.
I mean, look,
so that is actually a different statement.
Fair enough. If Warren can get to where Bernie was,
exactly.
You know what?
Then
Absolutely. If Warren comes out and says that superdelegates in states that I finish in the first four of, I mean, because it still wouldn't work because she's losing. Which is also what underlines how ridiculous this is. But if she says,
the whole point.
You know what, if Elizabeth Warren comes out and says, in any state that I crack 10% in,
where I'm viable.
If I cracked, if Elizabeth Warren tracked what Bernie was saying there, she would say, in every state that I get a fourth of the vote in, a fourth of the superdelegates should consider voting for me.
Yes.
Like, I'm sorry. It's ridiculous.
So,
and I will restate again, I wish that Jeff Weaver had never gone out and said, and by the way, with different rules, because the rules in 2016, and this was a reform, was that it was contemporaneous. It wasn't on the second round. So you could say you were almost campaigning for these super states. Okay. Ridiculous. But that was what it was. Elizabeth Warren's really into the rules. It was a different rule set, but I wish he didn't do that because I think the majority is sacrosanct and infinitely more important than the rules.
100%.
So 100%. But what Bernie said there, and he is the leader, and that is on a national platform, and that is infinitely more important than a briefing that Weaver put out. That is what he said. So if Elizabeth Warren comes out and says, I have the same position as Bernie, which is that in every place that I crack double digits, I should get 10% of the superdelegate vote, no problem from me.
Yeah, she's got to get
would
there.
Track.
She has to get there.
There we go. I mean, I don't even. Wow. I don't even know.
I mean,
I don't know how people could keep indulging.
My frustration just comes with the fact that, like, I think this sort of like gotcha has been floating around for a couple weeks now, and I think it is flimsier than I even personally thought it was.
It is, and part of it is.
And I feel bad about that.
I feel bad because, including on this show, for some reason, there is just this need to constantly bend over backwards for what are transparently bad faith arguments. I'm sorry. I mean, and I'm, I know I have frustration about this because there was a time in this campaign where saying, why did Elizabeth Warren support this Trump defense increase? How could you say that? I would much prefer her be my CPA. I mean, look, this is where I am just getting irritated, but this is a great example. Play all the facts out, and the Bernie position is the infinitely more democratic one.
Guess what? I'm also not a fan of the filibuster, but
yeah, but you know what? I'm sorry.
That's not what matters right now.
Not only is that not what matters right now, maybe there's a slight performative contradiction in saying I am willing to predicate my continued presence in this campaign on some type of weird convoluted process that I don't even think would put her at the top of the ticket. She just honestly has too few votes. Well, I think it would put her as VP. She's not in the game.
It's just so strange to go from the unity thing to, the discussion with a woman can't win to now this, where she's throwing her stock behind that, basically these Democratic leaders who are willing to,
someone should primary her
to stop.
Someone should primary her.
She's legitimizing a process that she is not going to benefit
from.
Well, maybe she sees a better, and what's incredible is I don't even see, I know some people are whining because Bernie's campaigning in Massachusetts, which I know is just totally unfair.
So you got smart political move, which is apparently how some people just like to judge Warren's things.
Yeah.
But I don't know.
Smart, and what's funny is that the smart political move, which is actually towards the goal of winning, not dunking on somebody,
not harvesting Buster sentiment.
Yeah, I don't, whatever. I mean, it's just it's disgusting and embarrassing, and it plays into what Thomas Friedman is doing.
And we should maybe move off Warren, but maybe more important is the way the tax stuff with regards to healthcare that she's hitting Bernie on. So I mean, we can cover this tomorrow when Sam's here.
Well, look, I'm going to say that really quickly. You put out a release saying Bernie's going to raise middle class taxes. Elizabeth, no one did better, and I said this at the time, even as a total Bernie bro, that the way Elizabeth Warren dispatched with that argument when she was in another place, or saying she was in another place, whatever, 6 months ago, that's a ridiculous thing to talk about tax rates because your overall effective cost of living goes down with healthcare. She did that more effectively than Bernie, and now she's putting out shit using that same talking point against Bernie. And even someone like Zach Carter, who's been very sympathetic, is acknowledging that. I look, at a certain point, people need to get real about this. And this is not just petty who picked one way or another. This has bigger implications about democracy, about Medicare for all, and, what role somebody's actually playing in the process. And right now it's an extraordinarily toxic one in terms of reality. All right, let's take another call. You're calling from a 321 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from? Uh, 321, are you there? I guess 321 is not there. All right. You're calling from a 205 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
Hello?
Hello, 205. What's your name? Where are you calling from?
Hey, sorry, this is Cheyenne calling from Alabama.
I'm sorry, will you tell me your name one more time?
Cheyenne.
Cheyenne?
Cheyenne, yep, you got it.
Okay, cool. Hey, well, what's on your mind?
So what I really want to talk about with South Carolina coming up, a lot of the polls are showing that it's probably not going to be great for Bernie. and I'm fully expecting that he loses, and it seems like it's going to be by a pretty big margin at this point. But what I want to talk about is kind of something that has been really bothering me when seeing people like Bakari Sellers come on CNN and talk about how South Carolina is the real base of the Democratic Party, which I think is fundamentally untrue. And it's not to undermine how important black vote is. And I think that Bernie Sanders has done a good job in improving on that and expanding the base to that level. But when you talk about black voters who are 65 and older and who are historically conservative, that's not representative of the Democratic Party. And I think that the thing that bothers me the most as being somebody who is an American Muslim is that there isn't enough talk about how well Bernie has done with Muslims across the country. And you think about what happened in 2016, a state like Michigan is probably a little bit more representative of the Democratic base, with having a high African-American base there and having American Muslims who were the ones who pushed them to a victory. So I think that the narrative that's going to come out of South Carolina with what it seems like Bernie Sanders losing is that going to be that Bernie Sanders is not doing well with the black vote, and that he can't win without having the black vote, and it's just kind of undermining the millions of black people who support him who are not in the South, and then obviously talking about Hispanics and American Muslims across the country.
Yeah. I mean, look, let me just say out of the gate, someone like Bakari Sellers is, they hate Bernie Sanders, right? Like that's like Barney Frank. These are Democratic Party and corporate and, pundit class. They hate Bernie Sanders. They have different politics. They have different self-interest. Bakari Sellers is, Bernie Sanders winning a landslide, and Bacardi Sellers will say like, yeah, but Bernie bros. Like, I mean that.
Yeah,
that's
he's done that, right? Like,
yeah, but let me. So I'll
constantly moving the goalposts.
Yeah, so my point is that
ignore his goalposts.
That's my point. Is that so? The only part I want to push back on you a bit is South Carolina, of course, is important. I also don't know, like, frankly, a strong second place in South Carolina is great. And this is why we shouldn't buy into their goalpost moving. If any other candidate won the first three states and won the most representative state of a swing state in a general by a landslide, there would be nothing but positive news about it. And he's going to do decently in South Carolina. I actually think he might win South Carolina, but a solid second is zero problem, and it's not going to stop his momentum into the general. Well, I think on the other hand, look, I think I got what you're saying. I mean, do you want to restate it again?
No. I think that my only concern, I do agree with you that South Carolina is incredibly important. Mm-hmm. I think that what my concern is that the narrative that will be pushed out.
Yeah, but this is what I'm already. I'm not trying to be impatient, but I'm just saying, like, I don't know how to. I think again. I'll just say it again. There's no other way of saying it. It's already baked into the cake. You can't let your emotional life be determined by the bullshit that Bakari Sellers is going to say on TV. Like, that's what they're going to do. If Bernie Sanders does not win South Carolina, they are going to say this shows the race is wide open. This shows that Bernie can't do whatever. They're going to ignore. I mean, this is already even a myth from 2016. Bernie did very well with African Americans in the Midwest. And that was already bullshit. And the way we even talk about these voting blocks as singular monoliths is essentializing and dishonest. Right. So I don't know. People get really sensitive when I jump in, but it's almost like I hear how upset you're getting, or not, you're not getting upset, but I hear you can be frustrated. And I agree. It's super frustrating. I sit and watch this and we comment on it all day. It's disgusting. It's dishonest. It's stupid. It's, we've got people on national television saying that a group of elders should pick who the Democratic nominee is. We have people who can't even oppose this campaign and vote against it without, in fact, erasing millions of people, Muslim, Hispanic, Black, working class, young, old, but almost overwhelmingly working class and poor. Those are always the people that are dismissed and ignored and erased in this country, right? So, yeah, it's really frustrating. It's really gross. And the way you shut them up is by winning. And we are. And A second place finish in South Carolina is not stopping that. So if he finishes second,
I agree with you.
we'll just keep going.
I agree with you. I think
that's it.
I think that what concerns me is kind of, I guess, Nate Silver came out with what the probabilities look like. And so I don't know how much this is true, but I think what my concern and my fear is that if you lose to South Carolina, it's not even about the narrative that gets pushed out, but how that might subvert, like, people who, like me, I would consider myself to be a little bit more of a high information voter, but if you're not, and the only little information that you get is from cable news or just from word of mouth through, somebody who might watch it, if that pushes him over the edge on a couple of Super Tuesday states, my concern is that if Biden does better, somehow a victory in South Carolina catapults into a win in Texas.
Just keep working. Just keep working.
It might happen.
That's all.
I don't know.
It might happen. Just keep. Honestly, I gotta just tell you, it's like, and I don't mean this hostily. You just got to keep working. If you have time to support the Sanders campaign, send texts, make calls. That's it. The only answer to anxiety is work. And the Silver, like the Nate Silver models look great for Bernie right now, but I didn't predicate my support of the best candidate on when those models look bad, on when they look good, on what, on whether Bakari Sellers is saying, Bernie Sanders is old, or pretending, or saying something defamatory.
Trump won versus all this shit.
Yeah. And that is the one thing. I'll be even more provocative. That is the thing to learn from them. Have that swag. Fuck these people. They're nerds. They suck. They can't even win. It's embarrassing. So if you feel anxious, just go make some calls.
For my part,
thanks for the call, man. Appreciate it.
For my part, I am doing that.
That's all I got for you. I can't. The best that's a soothe anxiety call, and the best advice I have for soothing anxiety is work, or don't read Nate Silver for a couple of days. It's not going anywhere.
If you actually I can't remember who it was, but somebody's like, I just spent time phone banking, and guess what? Like, this dumb shit that comes up in the media all the time about like Russia or authoritarians. No
one leaves a day of door knocking being like, my concern.
People aren't watching CNN. They're watching
out
like
of the
Siesta
media
Key.
for a second.
Get out of it. Go watch a comedy. Go either do something that has absolutely nothing to do with this, or consume content that makes you feel empowered and optimistic, or go knock on doors. It was so much less dramatic than this, but I'm telling you, I went with my friend Luke Mayville to knock on doors in Idaho for Medicaid expansion. This is relative to a presidential race. It's so much less intense and high stakes and all this. I got so happy doing that. For like a week, it improved my mood. Going and spending 3 hours knocking on doors. So that's it. That's all. And in general, I'll just be really transparent. If your call is an anxiety call like that, I get it. I have anxiety myself, but that's my set of answers I got.
We're not going to be able to talk through it.
Yeah, we can't work it out
too much
on air.
It's a matter of power and politics and things like that.
That's it. Go do the work or take a break.
It reminds me of...
and that's you to modulate. And when I say take a break, I don't mean that critically.
Yeah, I mean, like, it reminds me of when I was in the UK, the way they catcall over there is builders say, cheer up, it might never happen. And that's kind of like, we need to organize because it might never happen. Because we might actually win.
It might actually win. That's so if that's, especially while I'm hosting, if that's your kind of call, I love you, but think of something else to call in about. You're calling from an 818 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from? Are you there?
Every other call this time.
Yeah. It's a real gap here, though. 818, are you there? Huh. I'll try one more time. 818. I guess 818 is not there. All right. So in the top of the show, we played Secretary of Health and Human Services, Azar, not committing to having freely available vaccinations in case of a disease pandemic. Jane Schakowsky is a very good congresswoman, so that's why she was questioning him on it. I wonder what the august leader... when I heard Azar saying that, I was waiting for Nancy Pelosi to being like,
I was waiting for her to do this.
Yeah, tear it up.
Yeah, I was waiting for a tear up. I was waiting for
tear up this is the bill for your COVID-19 vaccine. I'm gonna tear it up like Nancy Pelosi and Trump.
Boom! Oh, clap back.
Instead, she just retweeted it. Basically,
instead, it's almost like she retweeted it, and it wasn't a quote tweet.
Vaccines. We must make sure that the vaccines are affordable. Affordable, and we think it's important to make that point because of what Secretary Azar said yesterday. We would want to ensure that we can work to make it affordable, but we can't control the price because we need the private sector to invest. Really, this would be a vaccine that is developed with the taxpayer dollars to again prevent, and we think that should be available to everyone, not dependent on big pharma. I guess yesterday when the secretary made that.
She's like doing the critique while we're just repeating what he said.
Yeah, she just that's just the corporate social responsibility version of the same thing, which is, by the way, where they'll end up in the same place too. There is no way yes, poor people can die without health care and we don't have to give them subsidies. If there is actually a pandemic or anything that interferes on the streets or the suburbs, believe me, the Republicans will make sure that everybody can get their hands on it. It's just they're both saying, we're not going to invest in public infrastructure. We're not going to use that same taxpayer dollars to radically increase public health funding or have public production of drugs, which is done all across the world to great benefit. All they're saying is, we will make sure some type of Rube Goldberg, this is my new favorite thing, because it all does start to look like that to me. Enormous, complicated, unnecessary contraptions that mediate between public resource and delivery to people just so enormous predators who contribute nothing to the public good and only harm us, like pharmaceutical companies, can get their massive bloated cut. And in this instance, there's no daylight between Azar and Nancy Pelosi.
The idea that if I'm a person who puts off purchases because I need to wait for a paycheck to come in, I'm going to get the affordable vaccine is like, this is great for public health.
It's brilliant. Very well done. All right, let's read a few IMs. Jude from CT. Any more data on the Sam event on Saturday that Sam is attending? Can't find any online. Also, Michael, I'm looking forward to your show on Sunday. That's actually a good point. I mean, that's pretty amazing. You should want to go to Worcester to help campaign for Bernie with Sam and H. John Benjamin. But like, where is there any information on that?
I mean, I would ask. Sam will probably mention it tomorrow, but I'll see online if there's anything.
Yeah, follow Sam's Twitter feed and ask tomorrow.
Google isn't that helpful.
Yeah. P.S. Warren still didn't answer the brokered convention question. The dude asked, what should the will of the people be subverted? Her response was to blame Bernie. She avoided answering anything about why people's votes don't matter in her opinion. Good point. DMV Mailman, what candidates do you think will be around after Tuesday? I don't know. I think Klobuchar. I don't know about. I think Klobuchar is probably. I get this. I mean, okay, Bloomberg. It's all just a question of whether or not he wants to stop spending money. So, Steyer might actually even be out after Saturday. Might. I doubt it, but I mean, if Steyer doesn't finish in the top 3 in South Carolina. I mean, I don't know what his incentive is to keep just wasting
especially
and
with
embarrassing
California
himself.
on Tuesday, which, some people seem to believe that's what he's gunning for, is a Senate seat in California.
Right. And as things stand now, he'll lose pretty big in Cali. So I don't know. I mean, my gut is the folks to drop out next are probably Klobuchar and Steyer. Because I think Klobuchar, Klobuchar was savvy as hell. Because she did not have the one state, she had serious overperformance in New Hampshire, but I mean, she lost, but she did well enough in New Hampshire to get the media oxygen till Nevada. Iowa, she actually didn't do that great in. She just came out early enough to make it look good, which was really savvy, but she didn't so I feel like she has another poor showing, and she doesn't have any personal wealth or anything. So I don't know, like how long can Cargill keep funding that, or, whoever, I don't know.
How long does she want more prosecutor stuff to come out too?
Right.
Yeah, I mean, everyone but Bernie and the billionaires are in something of a cash crunch. So
right.
It'll really depend on what happens in all these Super Tuesday states.
I get the feeling, I think after Super Tuesday, Bloomberg, Bernie, and then, it also really depends. Like, is Warren really actually saying that she's just going to stay in here running a pure stolen convention campaign?
Yeah.
Like, I don't know. I honestly don't know what's going on with her.
That's what I think.
Yeah.
Like, I don't have the, I'm not giving her more credit than she should have by thinking she's going to do the right thing about this stuff. And I'm not going to say she's obviously a snake, even though I did participate in that a little bit, and shaft him. Like, I think it's unclear which way she's going to go. I'm not going to try to guess. I don't like to predict things in general, but she should do the right thing. And if she doesn't, she'll hear about it from the left.
Oh, I'm sorry. As far as hearing about it, I think folks should be taking a very nice look around the political talent in the grassroots of Massachusetts. That we're definitely already in that place. I wonder if Pete Buttigieg would have jumped over to the Matrix universe to take the red pill, not to be gay. I don't get that. What does that have to do with anything?
Seems like a homophobic comment. But maybe
wait.
Don't interpret it right.
Pete, it does sound homophobic, but did Pete say something like that recently?
He would jump.
No, not something. I don't remember. I think I'm trying to
Might be
give
too
the
deep of a cut.
IMer more credit that Pete said something analogous to that himself.
I would say
I don't know.
In terms of jokes like this, I would provide more context. Don't assume.
Yeah, you're going for a reach joke that isn't even that funny, even with context. Not to be too harsh. But I don't know. But I'm trying to give credit because I think that there is a, I don't know. Anyways, sorry, shouldn't have read it even. I was already halfway in it before I saw it. I don't think I've heard Mark Gamba brought up on the show. He's DSA, our Revolution Back candidate, and challenging Blue Dog Kurt Schrader in Oregon's 5th. Schrader is awful and recently voted against the PRO Act. Would love to see Sam interview him. Mark Gamba, solidarity. Okay, cool. Bernie voter alert, completely re-registered to vote. Suddenly this year I was delisted from the polls, something I held onto while homeless. I just voted at the last local off-year election, so purge is odd, and I wasn't listed in the first page of my board election voter registration webpage. Yeah, that's a really good idea. Everybody should check their voter status if you're voting Bernie.
Regardless of that, every state has their own separate thing. There should be a federal clearinghouse where you can easily check your voting status. Because I had this happen to me in New York, too, because North Dakota, you don't have to register to vote. And when I came here the first time I registered, I don't want to go back into it, but it made me feel conspiratorial. I wasn't able to vote.
Foreign agent. If Bernie comes out of Super Tuesday with a substantial delegate lead and Klobuchar and maybe Warren drop out, will Bloomberg be able to convince Sam to turn on the IMs in the fun half? Oh, come on. Jay Cool. All right, let me look. No, I'm not going to get into that. I wish people would, in a very broad sense, have the ability to call coups. Yes. Yes. And speaking of which, let's actually go over this this reporting that validates what we already knew if you were following what was happening. This past fall, there was a coup in Bolivia which removed Evo Morales from power. Evo had governed Bolivia for a couple of terms. He was very effective as president. He lifted millions of people out of poverty. Were there criticisms? Were there mistakes? Kind of like definitionally, yes, he was a president. And the big piece of evidence that people marshaled to try to make the case that he was some type of dictator, which is ludicrous. It's absolutely not a dictator. Okay, that is a very strong charge without any evidence. Was that he got the Constitution amended so he could run for another term, and the courts ruled in his favor. Although I believe the referendum rejected that. I believe by a narrow margin, people didn't want to give him another term. Now, again, Mike Bloomberg pushing through a third term in the New York City Council, is that a bit autocratic? Yeah, it is. Was it maybe a bit autocratic for Morales to do that? Sure, maybe. It does not make him a dictator. And of course, unlike Bloomberg, he was not the agent of the oligarch class. He was an agent of the poor and indigenous people, of whom he did an enormous amount as president of Bolivia.
Which is an important factor when considering these things, I think.
The factor.
Yeah.
It is the factor. He was going up against institutional interest to try to preserve enormous strides that he had delivered for people. Again, much bigger, there's critiques from the left and blah, blah, blah. But the case in all of these places, Venezuela, Nicaragua, anywhere, the only people who have any credible critiques of the governing parties oppose all U.S. intervention and coup mongering against them. So be very clear about that. And there was a huge AstroTurf campaign, including attempts to blame the Amazon fires that originated under the Bolsonaro government on Morales. It was aggressive, it was active, and you see similar attempts actually right now against AMLO in Mexico, and I have no doubt that these are U.S. orchestrated and backed. But the other main thing that happened was a vote count question. And we said at the time, because we read an analysis from Guillermo Long and Mark Weisbrod, it was really obvious. Basically, the leading candidate needs to win by a margin of 10 points in order to not have a runoff. The first reported votes came out, showed Morales with a several point lead, not a double digit lead. So even in this scenario, to be really clear, he was still, there's no scenario, including even the most ardent and pro-coup scenarios, that Morales was not receiving more votes than his closest competition, just to be very clear. The votes were stopped and the government actually declared victory. Now, what they said and what has been vindicated was actually in the same way that 8 precincts are reporting for Bernie, but we actually can see that by this margin, he's going to win Nevada. So basically, what had been reported and the margin that Morales had showed a trend that was going to get replicated, because basically the parts of the country that hadn't been reported yet were key parts of his base. So he was inevitable. He was going to hit that target. The OAS, acting as an agent of the United States.
The Office of American States.
Office of American States.
As a D.C. address.
I'll quote now from a piece that just was published in the very anti-U.S. regime change effort Washington Post. Bolivia dismissed its October elections as fraudulent. Our research found no reason to suspect fraud. A quick recap. And I'm quoting now from John Curiel and Jack R. Williams. A quick recap. Morales claimed victory in October's election, but the opposition protested about what it called electoral fraud. On November 10th, a report from the Organization of American States, OAS, noted election irregularities, which, quote, leads the technical audit team to question the integrity of the results of the election on October 20th. Police then joined the protests, and Morales sought asylum in Mexico. The military installed government charged Morales with sedition and terrorism. A European Union report noted that 40 former electoral officials had been arrested and were facing criminal charges of sedition and subversion, and 35 people had died in post-electoral conflict. Because there's also right-wing paramilitary squads terrorizing Morales supporters, burning indigenous people's flags. The installed coup leader marched with a massive oversized Bible to the presidential palace. Masked soldiers went into the Bolivian parliament. The highest polling presidential candidate, a member of Morales's MAS party, Movement for Socialism, has received the summons from prosecutors for undisclosed crimes And this is for the current upcoming elections in an obvious effort, like with lawfare in Brazil, to keep the left off of the ballot. The media has largely reported the allegations of fraud as fact, and many commentators have justified the coup as response to electoral fraud by Mas and by the Mas party. However, as specialists in election integrity, we find that the statistical evidence does not support the claim of fraud in Bolivia's October election. And it goes on to sort of, I'm going to try to sort of figure out how to condense this a bit, but basically, it restates what we said contemporaneously, what all of the research of objective reporters said. But I'll just go over this one part. The preliminary count halted with 84% of the vote counted, when Morales had a 7.87 percentage point lead. Though the halt was consistent with election officers' earlier promise to count at least 80%, so they went 4% over, of the preliminary vote on election night and continued through the official count, the OAS quickly expressed concerns over the stop. When the preliminary count was resumed, Morales' margin was above the 10% threshold. The OAS claimed that the preliminary count resulted in a, quote, highly unlikely trend in favor of the Mas IPCP when the count resumed. The OAS reported, quote unquote, deep concern and surprise at the drastic, hard to explain trends in the preliminary results. Now, 84% reported a 7% lead. Is that really so shocking it would get to 10%? And notice all of the language. It's all deep concern, surprising trend. There's no math here. There's nothing. It's all just
English major shit.
This
is why the CIA recruits from Ivy Leagues.
This is why the CIA recruits from Ivy Leagues. This is why modern CIA coups are really they're just like selling Nikes. I mean, the military can still be brought in, but the OAS could just as easily say, here, we're going to give you the pretense. Now, all the military, fascist, paramilitary forces and all of the big agribusinesses and Brazil, now you can come in with your money and your death squads to finish this coup. And then it goes on to say, but the statistical analysis behind this claim is problematic. I'll just actually say that you should read this piece in the Washington Post itself. I can't go over all of it because it would get us bogged down too much. But you see the big takeaways there, right? 84% reported, 7-point lead, goes to 10 when all are reported. The OAS does not wait. There's no irregularity in the process. The officials said we're going to give you 80% on election night. They gave 84% of the vote. And there's zero indication in any part of the process that Morales did not win this election. And of course, Morales, this is no surprise to anybody. Whatever his mistakes and people's sort of fatigue with an incumbent, he lifted several million Bolivians out of poverty. The average height of Bolivians has increased under his leadership. And even though he was willing, and there's very similar dynamics in all of these pink tide places that the U.S. has interfered with, but he was not even rejecting outside investment in vital areas like lithium or natural gas. He was just saying we're going to have arrangements where there's local cuts. The government's going to get some of this, and that's how we're going to spend on social programs, because you're not going to just extract, destroy our environment and indigenous communities and give nothing, which is the standard U.S. relationship with these places, right? Now, this is what Yasha Monk, the very, very, very important, very serious commentator who opposes authoritarianism, this is what he tweeted at the time. No, and to be clear, Evo didn't resign. He didn't say all right, people aren't happy. He fled in the middle of the night to get on a plane to Mexico because these people were going to murder him and put him up on fraudulent charges because it was a military junta government. This is what Yasha Monk said. No, Evo Morales' resignation was not a coup. It was one of the few big victories democracy has won in recent years. Both leftist dictators like Venezuela's Maduro and far-right populists like Hungary's Orban should be terrified by it. Well, I could guarantee you Orban to the extent he was aware, was thrilled by it because he's on the opposite side ideologically, you fucking moron.
Idiot.
And it just breathtakingly stupid comment right there. And this coup was no doubt backed by the Trump administration, who's his ideological ally. I'll say once again, you fucking moron. And the Venezuelans are going to be, of course they're going to be concerned, and they're going to double down on their strategy to protect themselves.
Also,
and
we have some more tweets unless you want.
I just want to say really, as with all of these places, there are correct. We need to be able to have some objective assessment in longer forums about the internal failings of these governments and their own mistakes they've made. But Venezuela, number one, I don't take as an assumption. I don't take for granted that there's been fraudulent elections in Venezuela at all. That's an assertion that I have not seen proof
It seems
of.
like the one we just investigated looked to be not fraudulent. So
this one is 100% right. We know, right?
The one that
we know the record is that they're lying about Bolivia. So they always say this about Venezuela. We don't know. Then we know with Venezuela that to the extent that this government has been able to protect itself from constant efforts at a U.S. coup and the public recognition by Donald Trump and Nancy Pelosi of some random guy that claims he's president and has been begging outside forces in the United States and Colombia and Brazil to wage a coup. Yeah, there is a lesson there for Venezuela, which is thank God we cut a deal with our military and you haven't been able to do this to us, which then will get recycled into sanctimonious bullshit in the United States. Like, oh, Venezuela is the military. They're with the military. That's not good. That's not democratic. What they should do is alienate their military, and then we can go in and have a coup, and then they can have a proper military dictatorship.
The same shit behind the Castro discourse.
It's the same shit behind the Castro discourse, and I do not, and I make it different. I look, if you have a good faith person, particularly from a country, and you've had bad experiences with the government, I don't take that away from you, and that's a valid perspective. But the sanctimony and moralism, Lula and Morales, okay, particularly Lula, but absolutely Morales, play by the rules, classic coup in Bolivia, judicial coup in Brazil. Castro, Nicaragua, and Venezuela survive. Why? Better start to be able to get real about that. All right, let's do some more.
A few more tweets. This one I think is from earlier, but Yasha, pay attention to the awful events unfolding in Bolivia. Evo Morales likely falsified. When is Yasha gonna? He hasn't tweeted about this since November.
Likely doing a lot of work there.
The electronic account suddenly stopped, which again, the Washington Post
just explained.
Yeah, explained.
Could have looked into this.
And
at the time, this is not new information.
Yeah, and so Yasha again, instead today he's just tweeting about how Bernie's going to lose in the general. We have Clara Jeffrey of Mother Jones. Dicey times in Bolivia. Morales had taken several end runs around the democratic process, but let's hope it is a democratic process that succeeds him. Well, Clara, how did that work out?
Yeah.
And then
Thanks,
the
Claire.
Economist, which I must admit, like 15 or 10 years ago, I used to think like I'm going to subscribe to that and be smart. Evo Morales' resignation prompted a chorus of denunciations of a coup, but this time at least the critics are wrong. Well, maybe they weren't wrong. Maybe people should go retroactively invest some credibility into those critics.
Absolutely. I mean, yes. I honestly like that. Just look, if you are not willing to see the absolute obvious of something like that, then honestly just keep your mouth shut. That's like really what's best. Because you'll only end up embarrassing yourself. Doug from MA. I talked to my mother after Nevada about the race. She's not politically active, and her sense of Sanders is that he's a nice old geezer. Seems just like more like a normal person than other candidates. She really likes his family. She says that Jane looks like her and her friends, and the kids seem nervous on stage and are not used to being in a camera. Finds that very relatable. Yep. Regarding other candidates, she said she thought Warren was done, was interested in Bloomberg until I mentioned all the sexual harassment cases, at which she was immediately repulsed and said, I guess it's Bernie Den. The normies are ready. That's what the polls are indicating. Scam Cedar. What are your thoughts on a Trump Tulsi ticket? It sounds ludicrous at first, but given her unusual politics, not impossible. That would be the only ticket I think Sanders could lose to. Well, I think Sanders could lose to a Trump-Pence ticket, and people need to start getting super fucking serious about winning this election. I don't think that will happen. I don't see that happening. What do you think the odds are that Cuomo's watching Bloomberg goof himself and taking notes and calculating his own future? 100 or 100? Yeah, I guess. I mean, I think Cuomo he chose not to run this time. Like, I mean, I guess if they lose, he could run in 2024. But I don't think Andrew Cuomo's like stupid. Maybe, I don't know, maybe take a stab at a Senate run, but Andrew Cuomo, I mean, look, his brother's on TV. I don't know. I mean, look, he's the governor of New York. He's done a lot of terrible things, but I don't know.
Be nice to see him gone, but.
Yeah. Please, guys, get Const's name right. Miss Const. It is Nomiki. Nomiki, not Nomiki. Michael wasn't in studio the day she told Sam the correct pronunciation, but she's a good friend, so please practice and get it right. Well, she is a good friend. I will try, and I will never practice. I promise you that. That is never going to happen. All right, let's do a few more pieces of sound. Let's do, we're almost done here. Let's do, well, I just want to do this. Yeah, I want to do this Trump thing. So coronavirus, we've talked about. We've already seen that both Nancy Pelosi and the Health and Human Services Secretary are not committed to taking a vaccine out of market play and ensuring that everybody can get it. And there's a lot of concern that, just like with the George W. Bush administration, a administration filled with industry hacks and flunkies is, it's horrible and day in and day out grind in the best of times. With a pandemic, this could be an emergency. But not to worry, Donald Trump has somebody he'll put in charge.
What I've done is I'm going to be announcing exactly right now that I'm going to be putting our Vice President, Mike Pence, in charge. And Mike will be working with the professionals and doctors and everybody else that's working. The team is brilliant. I spent a lot of time with the team over the last couple of weeks, but they're totally brilliant, and we're doing really well. And Mike is going to be in charge, and Mike will report back to me. But he's got a certain talent for this, and I'm going to ask Mike Pence to say a few words, please. Thank you, Mike.
Thank you, Mr. President. President Trump's made clear from the first days of this administration we have no higher priority than the safety, security, health, and well-being of the American people. And from the first word of an outbreak of the coronavirus, the President took unprecedented steps to protect the American people from the spread of this disease. He recounted those briefly, but the establishment of travel restrictions, aggressive quarantine effort of Americans that are returning, declaration of a public health emergency, and establishing the White House Corona Task Force are all reflective of the urgency that the President has brought to a whole of government.
Okay, so you see, and you see the foreshadowing there of they sense enormous threat and opportunity in this. The threat is obviously, if this turns into a crisis, that's bad for the incumbent administration, period. On the other hand, this can be used to terrorize immigrants and refugees and push through new authoritarian measures. I'm not a huge fan of this sort of this feels very Daily Show era, but I still think this is worth playing, not because I care, frankly. Look, you can believe whatever the hell you want to believe. And there's plenty. I mean, there are planets that are discovered in the Vatican's astronomy wing, right? Your personal belief obviously is going to affect you, how you act. However, I think we overstate the importance of this and we make too many one-to-ones. But in Mike Pence's case, there is already a horrifying example we have in the real world of the type of literalism that he expressed here.
And now that we've recognized evolution as a theory, I would simply and humbly ask, can we teach it as such? And can we also consider teaching other theories of the origin of species, like the theory that was believed in by every signer of the Declaration of Independence. Every signer of the Declaration of Independence believed that men and women were created and were endowed by that same Creator with certain unalienable rights. The Bible tells us that God created man in his own image, male and female, he created them. And I believe that.
All right. Okay. Now, the reason this is relevant, not just because of the, again, Daily Show, ha, 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 Republicans are crazy, they don't accept evolution. In Mike Pence's case, he is a totalitarian dominionist in his ideology. This is what he did when he was governor of Indiana. There was an outbreak in HIV. As a member of Congress, of course, he had voted to cut Planned Parenthood, which helped set the stage for this. 2 years later, I'm quoting now from the Washington Post, a Planned Parenthood clinic that had been an HIV testing center in Scott County, Indiana, closed after public health spending cuts, the Huffington Post reported. 2 months passed from the start of the outbreak in 2015, before that is an HIV outbreak, before Pence declared a public state of emergency. The spread of the disease was attributed to people injecting Opana, an addictive painkiller which shared needles. But Pence didn't agree with federal health experts that distributing clean needles was a good idea. I don't believe in anti-drug policies involving handing out drug paraphernalia, he told the Indianapolis Star at the time, despite an assurance from the Center for Disease Control and Prevention that it is an effective way to halt the spread of infections and disease such as HIV and hepatitis B and C. Pence said that state lawmakers had tried to send him a bill for a needle exchange program. If they tried to send him a bill for a needle exchange program, he would veto it. As cases spiked, Pence reportedly turned to prayer. After 75 people were confirmed to be HIV positive, Pence announced that he would allow a 30-day needle exchange program. Public health officials weren't the only ones to warn Pence about delaying action. State Rep Ed Clare, a fellow Republican, also pushed Pence to approve the needle exchange program. It was disappointing that it took that much effort to bring the governor on board, Clare told the New York Times. That's who's in charge of dealing with the coronavirus. And also, I think, Trump, it's a win-win, because if it fails, Mike, meet Tulsi. No, I'm just kidding. I don't know if it would be Tulsi, but I don't think it would be anybody. It would still be Mike. It's just Mike. We get all the flack.
It is funny that Mike's getting teed up here to be the fall guy.
Absolutely.
The
100%
absolute incompetence.
But maybe I'm being a little alarmist, but him being an evangelical and his past records with public health and, the evangelical openness to the end times and acceptance of those end times is scary when he's leading against a epidemic, a plague.
Well,
of
it's
sorts.
the same, the same way the guy wants a war on, he wants to attack Iran.
Of course.
This is an example of someone who actually believes in, first is drawing a distinction between what type of religion do you actually believe in, and then secondly, it's to what extent is this affecting you? And this guy is the most extreme, insane preacher on television. This guy really believes this stuff. He's nuts and dangerous. All right, let's play clip number 5. Last clip of the day. You might be concerned about all of the guts to public health the Trump administration has implemented. Well, Donald Trump isn't.
Have consistently called for enormous cuts to the CDC, the NIH, and the WHO. You've talked a lot today about how these professionals are excellent, how they're critical and necessary. Does this experience at all give you pause about those?
No, because we can get money and we can increase staff. We know all the people. We know all the good people. It was a question I asked the doctors before. Some of the people we cut, they haven't been used for many, many years. And if we ever need them, we can get them very.
What are they, relief pitchers?
Yeah.
We've got CDC relief. They're warming up in the bullpen.
Those cars have just been sitting in the garage.
Yeah,
it's like Leno's garage out there at the CDC.
I like the way they're loosening their arms up. They were free agents.
We cut them, but they're just throwing around the minors.
Yeah, it doesn't mean that they can't get called up from the minors.
many years, and if we ever need them, we can get them very quickly. And rather than spending the money, and I'm a business person, I don't like having thousands of people around when you don't need them. When we need them, we can get them back very quickly. For instance, we're bringing some people in tomorrow that are already in this, great government that we have.
You didn't want to say.
I don't want to be like, alarmist again, but like the worker that he's talking about is like a day laborer, basically. He's like, there are all these guys just waiting around. They want to work because I was on the construction site. Like these are very like educated professionals, and not to make distinction between work, but like Jesus fucking Christ, man.
Well, I mean, you know what? You can kind of flip it. Like, I don't know. Like, hey, I really need this building done. Like, I need this thing done in my house immediately. This thing's going to like fall in my kid's room. Well, we've got plenty of doctors sitting around. Like, it doesn't, it just is I mean, look.
I like how he stops himself.
I hope you feel comfortable with this guy handling a fucking, and this is Republican ideology. What were they doing?
Mm-hmm.
What were they doing? Yeah. Being prepared to thwart off a global pandemic. Well, it works in all three ways, right? Because it's like you have the Trump, like, hey, whatever, we'll make a deal with Corona, and then we've got the Republican, just cut the government, and then Pence is like, well, if we don't figure it out, it's the end of times, anyways. I mean, it is the locusts. What are you going to stop the locusts? It all works.
Them back very quickly. For instance, we're bringing some people in.
He doesn't want to say bureaucracy here, so he says our wonderful government.
Right. Tomorrow that are already in this, great government that we have, and very specifically for this, we can build up very, very quickly, and we've already done that. I mean, we really have built up. We have a great staff, and using Mike, I'm doing that because he's in the administration, and he's very good at doing what he does and doing as it relates to this. Yeah.
He's very great at doing what he does and as it relates to this.
Good question by Jeff Stein, too.
Yeah, that was a good question. All right. I'm going to take one final call, and then we're out of here. You're calling from a 509 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
Hey, Michael. It's Ronald Reagan.
Ronald Reagan. I am so honored and happy that you call while I'm in the chair. How are you?
You never call me anymore.
I know. I miss you.
I miss you too. I miss your smell. Sorry.
What's on your mind?
Yeah, are we
Besides
live?
my smell.
Are we live right now?
Yeah, we're live.
On the show? Okay.
Yeah, we are.
Okay, so just real quick. I mean, are you maybe discounting the possibility that like Bloomberg could get 22 to Bernie's 21%, and it would not be good for the candidates to say that the winner should take all right at this point? I mean, there's like a 0% chance of that happening, right?
A what percent chance?
Of delegates or votes?
I mean, the possibility of that happening, Bernie losing not getting a plurality, but being close, and some other less desirable candidate winning the plurality, in which case maybe you would want, to not have spent the last 3 or 4 months saying that whoever wins the plurality must be the nominee.
So let me say this. One, no, I actually don't see any. That would, for Bernie to get I'm talking votes, not delegates, votes. That would take a enormous reversal of fortune right now. So no, I don't see that happening. But more broad at all, and especially not now. But more broadly, well, 21. The only way Bernie gets it is by winning, because no one else is going to support him, right? So that's my other sort of very clear line of reasoning here. And 3, Ronald Reagan. I think Bloomberg adds a little bit of a wrinkle, to be honest, because of just the scale of money, like as a corrupting force. And so it would enter maybe a different sort of question set about the legitimacy of the process. However, no, I believe. Now, will I vote for that nominee? Do I think they're the best to go up against Trump? No, but I do not think that you undermine who won the most votes. I really don't. I have a pretty simplistic view of this. I'm sorry. And also I don't, so my big picture answer is no, absolutely not. Bernie will get it. My longer term, more kind of cynical answer is the only way Bernie gets it is by getting it, because all these other people are working against him. And I have no, I am very confident there is some type of Warren back channel with Biden. And I'll even, I'll even say this. I've heard that. Could be wrong, but that's my sense. And 3, yes, Bloomberg a wrinkle because of the money, but if you got the most votes, you should be put on the field. That's what I think.
Just real quick, I was recently in Oregon. I had the chance to do some Bernie proselytizing to my family, and cool. I had an experience where I had all three different degrees of experiences. So my dad hates Trump, but is also like, there's no way I'm going to vote for Bernie. He scares me because socialism,
right?
Whatever. He DVRs Tucker Carlson. So,
and he hates Trump.
Not going to happen.
But he hates Trump and he DVRs Tucker? Really?
Yeah, he hates. Well, there's this sort of thing about like Trump being gross, and he's obviously dumb. So he hasn't fallen under the spell of Trumpism, but he's just not going to be convinced by somebody like Bernie. He said he would rather not vote. I guess that's a win.
Yeah, I mean, could you picture him voting for I don't want to get too much into it, but I got to say, I mean, you know better than me, but if you're actually I totally could see, my dad reads, Thomas Friedman every weekend, and he's not going to vote for Bernie. Of course, that guy exists. I just don't think it's actually that many people. But Tucker, wow, maybe I'm thinking that just getting him not to vote's the goal there.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And with my mom, she would rather have a Klobuchar. Bernie makes her kind of nervous.
Sure. But
my mom likes FDR. Everybody loves FDR.
Good guy.
So I really leaned into that. And there's a little bit of work to be done, and I think it could be done. So don't spend any time on my dad. Spend more time on my mom. But then my sister walked in. She's like 40, apolitical, but he also hates Trump. My family doesn't like Trump with two exceptions. Anyways, I was like, Kelly, what do I need to do to get you to vote for Bernie? She's like, nothing. Consider it done.
Sweet.
And so I was like, yeah, these are the people that we should spend our time going after. And I think it's important for this reason. My mom made me realize with Bernie, and we have to be real about what's happening. There is a trade-off. There are people who would vote for a sort of standard canned Democrat, but not for Bernie. Maybe it's not that many, but they exist. And the deal is that you have to make up for those people with people like my sister who have previously been disengaged or unengaged. And so you were right on earlier when somebody called in, they were a little bit nervous, and you said, well, you got to get to work. We are going to, if Bernie's the nominee, he's going to be up against huge amounts of money and influence, but also the reality is there are people who will be spooked into not voting or voting third party, and we have to do the real work. I mean, people aren't going to magically materialize to vote for Bernie, right? So
I agree. I agree 1,000% with what you're saying. I agree completely. And the only thing I would add, honestly, this scares me, is that there isn't. I keep saying you did that whole long Kamala Harris thing. There is no person in the race that's I'm not too into them, but that's a standard issue Democrat who's got some ability to do their thing and they can win. That person doesn't exist. Joe Biden 2016 doesn't exist. So, maybe Klobuchar might do better with your mom, but this is not a person who's winning a national election. This is not a person who is going to drive out Democrats. she's not going to get your dad. She's not going to get your sister. You know, Elizabeth Warren is, I mean, this is like a Dukakis type thing. You know, I mean, and Bloomberg is Bloomberg. So, you know, I agree with you 1,000,000%. And I think that we had to make the case, you know, Bernie would have won. He was a better person to put up against Donald Trump, 1,000%. But he's going to be up against the entirety of the American oligarchy and residual fears, not amongst young people, but amongst people who vote most, not as older people. So people need to do a ton of work. This is definitely not the time to, you know, try to exact some concession to him on some, you know, laudable but small thing. This campaign should be talking about FDR every single second. They need to start bringing out, you know, I'm looking forward to the Willie Nelson show. You know, yes, I agree with you completely.
Yeah. So people should scan their families, look for those people. I've got nephews who are 17, 18 years old. It's going to be a lot easier to talk to them than to their parents. And then this is from my Mormon missionary days. You want to give people small things to do, right? Read an article or whatever, follow through with them later. My sister is from Utah, so I need to look up when their primary is. I need to follow through with her on other candidates down ballot because she voted against Trump, but she voted for Romney because she is so apolitical that she doesn't realize that they're like on the same team, right?
Right.
So just be willing to put in the work afterwards. It's not enough to just ask in passing, and be aggressive.
Ronald Reagan, that's so perfect. I hope, can people, I don't want to create content for you, but could you do a little redirect episode where you do like your Ronald Reagan guide for using Mormon missionary techniques for electing Bernie Sanders president? I'm serious. I think it would actually be really helpful. Oh, I don't know. I think Essie already left, but I'm going to follow up with him on that because I think it's great. And guys, honestly, you know, and I'm not going to say don't call, but think of something else to call about that we can chew on. The answer to your anxiety and the Nate Silver this and what's Bakari Sellers say that is that call. That's it. Done.
I just want to add one quick point on appealing to people like Reagan was talking about appealing, because I have a lot of these in my family. They're not Democrats or Republicans. There are some Republicans more than Democrats, but they mostly are independent people, right? And so you say the thing about Bernie Sanders being a socialist, all you have to do is talk to them about that. It was in Vox about how, yeah, socialist kind of drags Bernie down a little bit too. You know what drags him down even more? Democrat. And pretty much all of those people know that, yeah, I'm kind of more against Democrats than I am socialists at this point.
This is another reason why, you know, not to go, I mean, well, the whole drama was so ridiculous, but I mean, Joe Rogan. And Joe Rogan himself, you know, there you go. Okay. All right. And absolutely, I'm sure I would suspect that if you began out of the gate with Rogan, you know, saying socialism, he would not be super stoked. All right. Final I am of the day. Congressional baseball fan, we're in a real moment. We have momentum. We don't have time for pessimism. We got to work at this every single day, do the work. I've been volunteering for Bernie. I wear my Justice for All Bernie shirt everywhere I go. I get all kinds of people coming up to me to show support. A guy last night at the grocery store even gave his $5 and change towards my groceries because of my Bernie, not me, not us shirt. Play ball. That is fucking amazing. And that's exactly the attitude, folks. Everybody's back here tomorrow. See me and Nomiki on Tuesday. Peace and love.
It might take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught between the truth and the light bulb. But finding out won't make me feel any better. Yeah, I know the clock is ticking, but the meds are gonna kick in, and my pilot light shining bright. choice was made for the option where you don't get paid, for the road that bends before it finally breaks you. I guess somehow I lost my drive between the 101